Chapter 875. You flatter me, Your Highness. Li cupped his hands in greeting politely. He did not appear overly intimate, nor did he appear overly distant. His friendship with Li Xian was limited to the two of them. He once had some connection with Ning Wangfu, but that was a long time ago. You've been in the capital for so long and you even have a child, but your chess skills haven't improved at all. Ning Wang picked up a black piece and put it down. He looked at Li Xian and shook his head. Li Xian smiled awkwardly and said, Father's chess skills are superb. I am ashamed. Ning Wang looked up at Li Yi and suddenly said, I wonder if Dr. Li is interested in playing a game with I? To tell you the truth. Li Yi looked at Ning Wang and shook his head. I am not proficient in Go. He was speaking the truth. He had never played Go in his previous life. Although the rules and playing methods could be easily learned, he couldn't learn the experience. Otherwise he wouldn't have to play with the proud lowly and release the Dumbo, the earth-drilling mouse, and the celestial dog. With his current level of Go, he could only fool ordinary people. He was far from a master of Go. Li Xian had already given up his seat. He said, You are the #1 talent of the Jing Kingdom. Don't be humble. It would be best if you could win a few games against Father and help me save some face. Li Xian stood up. Ning Wang was sitting across from him and looking at him. It would be too awkward to refuse again. Li Yi could only nod and sit across from Ning Wang. Sir, you are playing Go with Uncle. The proud lowly ran over from the side and sat next to Li Yi. She propped up her chin with her hands and poked her head out to watch the game. Princess Ning and Emingzu also walked over. Ning Wang looked up at Li Emingzu and said, These days, thanks to you, brother can recuperate in peace. If it were anyone else, he wouldn't be able to relax in the affairs of the court. Princess Ning held her hand and said worriedly, Look, it has only been a year. You are so thin now. Li didn't quite understand Princess Ning's words. She drank soup every day and he even added some special ingredients to the soup. How was she skinny? Martial artists like her had well-proportioned bodies and didn't have any excess fat on their bodies. From head to toe, there were parts of her body that were fatter than a year ago. It was impossible for her to be skinny. It is indeed inappropriate to let you decide the affairs of the country alone. Prince Ning put down a piece and said, The efficiency in the 3 provinces is low, and there are many useless people. Outside the 3 provinces, you should make an exception and find some talented and virtuous people to help you deal with those trivial matters. You. After he said, he looked at Yi and said, Dr. Li is really not good at Go. Before Li Yi could speak, the proud lowly wrinkled her nose and said, Uncle, I will play for you. Ning Wang smiled and said, Since when does our Shaning know how to play Go? I will not play with you. If your father knows, he will say that I am bullying the young. The proud lowly put a piece on the board and said discontentedly, Uncle, don't look down on me. I'm very good at Go. Good. Shaning is the best. Seeing that Li Yi didn't mind, Prince Ning didn't say much. He played with her hand, but his moves were not as sharp as before and became casual. Princess Ning continued the conversation and looked at Emingzu. She said, Your uncle is right. You still need to find someone to help you in the affairs of the country. The capital governor is good. The people from the Xin family are said to be very capable. Prime Minister Qin is old now, but there are still a few people from the Qin family in the court. Like father, like son. In short, it is not so easy to take over the government affairs. Don't tire yourself out. Dong Wenyun is indeed very capable. Although the one from the Xin family is not as good as him, he is also not bad. As for the Qin family, except for Prime Minister Qin, there is no one capable. Prince Ning shook his head. He seemed to think of something and said, Qin He of the Qin family, what is his position in the court now? Qin He? A glimmer of confusion appeared in Mingzhu's eyes. In the second generation of the Qin family, other than Qin Yan, there were 2 other people who were officials in the court. She had never heard of this Qin He. Li Yi, who was watching the proud lowly play Go, said, Qin He, the 5th son of Prime Minister Qin. He has always been idle at home and has no official position. That is a bit strange. Prince Ning shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. He continued to talk about the matters of the court with the eldest princess. Li Yi had always thought that this Prince Ning, who was far away from the capital, was just an idle prince. However, when he talked about these matters, it was as if he had been in the court for a long time. It was truly surprising. Qin He, the 5th master of the Qin family. He had just said that the Qin family had no one capable, but he had singled out Qin He. What was so special about this 5th master of the Qin family? From Wu Er's side, there would often be news of the Qin family. More or less, the name of the 5th master of the Qin family would appear. However, the general description was the same as the rumors in the outside world. This fifth master of the Qin family did not have much of a position in the Qin family. He could even bully the younger generation of the Qin family as he pleased. As a result, he had always been in a state of self-abandonment. However, sometimes he would do some strange things. The proud lowly saw that his mood was not too high and thought that he was upset because he couldn't beat Imperial Uncle Ning Wang. She patted her little chest and said, "Sir, don't worry, we are about to win." Prince Ning, who was talking to Emingzu, turned his head and couldn't resist smiling. Although little Shanning knew how to play Go, which was somewhat unexpected, her skill level was not high. He only needed to casually deal with it. This Dr. Li was a friend of Emingzu and Xin. Naturally, he couldn't let him lose too badly. However, this game of Go had reached this point, so there was no need to continue. He smiled and picked up a chess piece. Just as he was about to put it on a certain position, his arms sank halfway. After a slight pause, he could no longer smile. The proud lowly raised Li Yi's palm and reached out her little hand to give it a pat. She said with a smile, "Sir, we won." The princesses of the royal family were not easy to deal with. Don't compete with Emingzu, don't play Go with Shanning. This was an iron rule. Prince Ning lost a game of Go. He was surprised by the proud lowly's Go skills and proposed another game. Of course, the proud lowly would not refuse. After all, Prince Ning had been immersed in Go for many years. No matter how talented the proud lowly was, she was only 14 years old. After a fierce fight, she gradually fell into a disadvantage. Of course, the one who lost in the end was still Prince Ning. Turning defeat into victory and reversing the situation was the proud lowly's specialty. Especially after she used the flying chess, the invisible chess, and the ultimate move of eating up the small chess pieces, Prince Ning lost without any suspense. The old emperor's illness was not as serious as he had imagined, which made him feel a little relieved. On his way home, sitting in the carriage, he inadvertently glanced out through the gap of the curtain, only to find that Fang seemed to have a lot on his mind. Before he could ask, Fang opened the curtain a little and asked, "Young master, I have a question to ask you." Li sat up straight. The first thing he thought about was whether he had encountered anything recently, so that he wouldn't be hurt by his words. After finding that he probably hadn't, he looked at him and said, "What's the matter? Say it." Fang looked at him and hesitated for a long time before he said, "I want to take little Hong home. What do you think will happen?" "I think you will die." Li looked at him and said without any hesitation. He was well aware of his sister-in-law's temperament. She had bought a large mansion in the capital city, and all the servants in the house were men. Not to mention young and beautiful maidservants, there wasn't even an old lady with yellow pearls. Forget about bringing Xiaohong back. If she knew what Lao Fang had been secretly doing for the past 2 years, Lao Fang wouldn't be sitting in the carriage and asking him this question now. With his timid personality, how could he suddenly have such a suicidal idea? Li Yi thought for a moment, looked at him and asked suspiciously, "You didn't take the girl's body and now you can't take it anymore, right?" "How could that be?" Fang waved his hands repeatedly. "Young master, even you don't dare to do this kind of thing. How could I? Really? Really?" Fang raised a hand. "I swear if I say half a word of lie, let me be struck by lightning." "No sincerity." Li shook his head and said, "It's winter, how could there be lightning?" Boom. As soon as he finished speaking, a thunderous sound suddenly exploded in his ears. Fang's whole body trembled. He looked up at the sky and found that there was no more sound. He looked at Li Yi and asked, "I really didn't do it, could it be that young master?" Boom, boom, boom. The deafening sound came again and it hurt people's eardrums. Chapter 876. The rumbling sound came suddenly. Fang turned over and rolled off the carriage. He looked at the sky vigilantly. After listening for a while, he realized that the sound did not come from the sky. He turned his head and saw that not far ahead, there was a woman beating the big drum in front of the yamen. What he heard just now was not thunder but the drum. He breathed a sigh of relief and jumped back into the carriage. He said, "So someone is beating the court drum." I was scared to death. The court drum was a large drum erected in front of the yamen. It had 2 functions. One was for the county magistrate to beat the drum to gather the crowd when he went to court. The other was for the commoners who had been wronged to beat the drum to express their grievances. Li lifted the curtain and took a look. The woman who had beaten the drum had already been ushered in by the yamen runners. He did not pay much attention to her. He put down the curtain and looked at old Fang. "Are you serious about what you said just now? It's not a good way to go on like this." Fang sighed and said, "There has to be an end to this matter." Li Yi hung the curtains to the side and asked curiously, "How did you and Lil Red meet?" Fang leaned against the carriage and looked at the sky. He smiled and said, "About a year before you came up the mountain." At first, Li Yi thought that Fang was just a simple and honest man without many thoughts. Later he found that his thoughts, especially when it came to feelings, were extremely delicate. Under his simple and honest appearance, there was a soul of coquettishness. He and Little Red got to know each other because of the old story of a bear saving the beauty. Later they met in the jadeite courtyard by chance. As time went by, they became familiar with each other. They communicated with each other across the wall in the jadeite courtyard and gradually developed to the point where they were today. According to Fang, it was not to the point. At present, the two of them only held hands in a pure relationship. The relationship between him and Mrs. Fang should be familial, and Little Red was probably Fang's love. As for how to make the two perfectly fuse, if he knew, he wouldn't have to run between them every day. His own affairs were still a mess and he couldn't help much with Fang's family affairs. Li Yi could only shake his head and say, "Let's think about this at length." "That's right, let's take our time to think about it." Fang nodded and said, "Miss Zuemo has already succeeded. Second Miss Ruoqing, Princess Royal, Miss Lin, and even Xiao Huan hasn't married yet. I'm afraid that the little princess only has Xiao Huan in her heart. We need to think about them one by one." Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "Well, I'll ask Rui to go over and talk to Mrs. Fang. Tell her that you want to bring another mistress back. As the first wife of the Fang family, she should be generous and not obstruct you. She will definitely listen to Rui. How about it? That's good enough, right?" Fang waved his hand repeatedly. "Forget it. I can solve this kind of trivial matter myself. I don't want to trouble Miss." The carriage gradually went away. In the yamen, a constable sent the woman out, shook his head and said helplessly, "Miss, this case has been handled by the yamen from the beginning to the end. You can go there and ask." The woman's face was pale, but she still nodded and said, "Thank you, constable." The constable looked at her and said with pity, "Miss, let me remind you, when you go to the yamen, don't knock the drum in front of the gate. Chu Ping Chui Shixin." Li Yi crumpled the paper in his hand into a ball and threw it into the stove. Chui Shixin and the young master of the Chu family were also in the wonderful sound pavilion when the imperial court criminal committed the murder. It was said that they were almost implicated. This was also one of the reasons why the capital governor's office placed so much importance on this case. He had never underestimated the Chu family and had always sent people to keep an eye on them. However, this matter had been handled by the yamen from the beginning to the end. Zheng Shichen hadn't sent any news, so there shouldn't be any problems. He warmed his hands by the fire, then picked up his brush and began to write on the rice paper spread out on the table. Mississippi Lu insisted that the Green Jade Case Lantern Festival he had written on the lantern that day was too sloppy. There were many words in it that she didn't recognize, so it wasn't a suitable gift. She wanted him to write it again. It was normal that Mississippi Lu couldn't recognize it. She only knew a few words and the situation that day was different. In order to speed things up, he had used a type of calligraphy that was between cursive and semi-cursive. Anyone with a bit of knowledge in calligraphy would be able to recognize it, but to an illiterate like her, it was naturally scribbled and couldn't be seen clearly. However, she was Mississippi Lu. If Second Miss wanted her to write it in regular script, she would write it in regular script. It wasn't a big deal. After Li Yi finished writing, she checked it and nodded in satisfaction. Li Yi reminded her, "Don't forget, you still owe me something." "What is it?" asked Mississippi Lu with a frown. According to the rules of the Lantern Festival, the lantern and the sachet had to be exchanged in the end. Mississippi Lu took his lantern, so she naturally had to give him a sachet. This was the rule of the game. "Since you took my lantern, you have to give me something. It's something that you women wear closely," reminded Li Yi again. Mississippi Lu frowned even more. "What are you talking about?" Li Yi pointed at her chest. "You still haven't guessed it?" "That year in the Mid-Autumn Festival, in that garden, those women stuffed it into my arms." Mississippi Lu finally understood. The doo-doo that was stuffed into his arms was thrown away by her. She looked up at him and asked coldly, "Are you sure?" Li Yi looked at her expression and said in surprise, "It can't be. It's not something valuable. You can't even bear to give it to me. Why don't you return the lantern to me? I don't want that thing anymore. Come in, I'll give it to you." Mississippi Lu thought for a moment. She crossed her arms and walked into her room. She said, "Remember to close the door." It was just a sachet. Why did she have to be so mysterious and close the door? It was not like she was doing something shameful. Li shook his head and followed her in, at the entrance of the capital magistrate's office. How many times have I told you? No one has claimed the body. It has long been buried in a mass grave. As for where it was buried, how would I know in the dark? A bailiff impatiently waved his hand and said, the magistrate's office is already doing its best to capture the culprit. The wanted poster has already been sent out. As long as the culprit is still in the capital, he won't be able to escape even if he has wings. Don't worry. Once we have news of the culprit, we will immediately send someone to inform you. The woman said softly, even in the hot summer, an unclaimed body should be kept for at least 3 days. Moreover, it is winter now, so it should be at least 7 days later. It's the new year. The coroner has already examined the body. There is nothing suspicious about the case. We just need to wait for the culprit to be brought to justice. The Yamen has nowhere to keep it for you. I've already told you what you need to know. I'm warning you, don't cause trouble here again. If you do, we won't be polite anymore. When the bailiff spoke again, his tone had become angry. The woman knelt in front of the Yamen and said in a sorrowful voice, I just want to know how my sister died. On the street, passers-by gradually gathered around and looked at the woman with puzzled gazes. They looked at the Yamen's door and pointed at it. When did she have another sister? In the back hall of the Yamen, Shui Qingming slammed his hand on the table and said angrily. Zheng Shichen took a sip of tea and said unhurriedly, although this is unexpected and there are a few more variables, it may not be a bad thing. If even her family believes that the woman died at the hands of the culprit, then there will be no more changes to the case in the future. I'm just afraid that the changes will happen now. Shui Qingming narrowed his eyes and murmured. Hearing the murderous intent in Shui Qingming's words, Zheng Shichen raised his head and glanced at him. He stood and said, this woman must not be touched. Shui Qingming smiled and said, Brother Zheng, there is no need to remind me. I know that if anything happens to this woman, it will attract the attention of people with ulterior motives. Zheng Shichen nodded and said no more. The two of them discussed a few more things before Shui Qingming left the Yamen through the back door. When he stepped onto the carriage, his body paused slightly and he turned his head to look at a guard in front of the carriage. He stretched out his hand and lightly waved it in the air. Inside the Yamen, at the dining table, a woman heard the rumbling outside and put down her bowl and chopsticks. She said with dissatisfaction, what is going on outside? There is no end to it, is there? A Yamen runner came in from outside and said with a bitter face, My lord, that woman did not listen to our advice at all. She has begun to beat the drum and complain about her grievances again. Zheng Shichen put down his chopsticks and his face darkened. He said, the capital Yamen is not a place for her to behave atrociously. Guards, arrest that woman. Give her 20 strokes of the cane and temporarily put her in prison. The Yamen runner was stunned and said with some uncertainty, My lord, this punishment, isn't it a bit too heavy? Zheng Shichen waved his hand. No matter. The prestige of the Yamen is not to be provoked. Only a heavy punishment will serve as a warning. Just be careful when executing the punishment. The Yamen runner said no more and bowed. This subordinate obeys. Chapter 877. At the entrance of the capital magistrate's office, the woman beating the drum was once again stopped by a bailiff. Many passers-by had stopped to watch from the side of the street. They pointed at the woman not far away and whispered to each other. I saw her beating the drum here early in the morning. I wonder what kind of injustice she has suffered? I heard that it's because of her sister's death. I also heard the bailiff say that she's a criminal. I'm afraid it's not because of the case at the wonderful Sound Pavilion 2 days ago. That evil thief's wanted poster is posted all over the street. What's she doing here? Could it be that there's more to this case? As the crowd discussed animatedly, a bailiff walked out from inside and looked at the woman. He waved his hand and said, Take her down. This is the capital magistrate's office. Is this a place for you to mess around? The bailiff looked at her indifferently and turned his head to say, Sir has ordered that this woman has repeatedly challenged the magistrate's authority and obstructed official business. Take her in and give her 20 strokes. Then he walked forward and dispersed the crowd on the street. He loudly said, There's nothing to see here. Disperse, disperse. Although the drum at the entrance of the Yamen was used by the people to seek justice, it was not allowed to be beaten randomly and disrupt the Yamen's normal order. However, even though there was such a rule, the woman had just lost a loved one. It was understandable that she was grieving. To punish her like this was somewhat unreasonable in the eyes of the crowd. However, this was not something they could discuss. They could only shake their heads and disperse as they watched the woman being taken in. Boss, are we really going to give her 20 strokes? A bailiff looked at the thin woman and said hesitantly, what if she dies after 20 strokes? You pig brain. The bailiff fiercely knocked on the man's head and said angrily, Sir has said to pay attention to propriety. If she dies, you'll pay with your life. The bailiff who was knocked on the head put on a long face and asked, what propriety? The bailiff waved his hand. It's enough. After beating her, take her to jail and lock her up first. Don't let her come out and cause trouble again. A moment later, the constable came to the pale-faced woman who was pressed on the stool. The scene of the woman's death that night appeared in his mind, and a trace of pity appeared on his face. He shook his head slightly and waved his hand, give me the board, I'll do it myself. When the two bailiffs escorted the woman into the prison, they felt that today was an eye-opener. After working in the yamen for so long, this was the first time they saw someone who could walk to the prison on her own after being flogged. I don't want it anymore. I don't want the sachet anymore. I don't want the lantern anymore. I don't want the poem anymore. Lee covered his butt and limped out of Mississippi Lou's room. He turned around and said, take it if you like it. What else do you like? Just take it, it's all yours. Mississippi Lou glanced at him and said faintly, who told you not to make it clear? Lee didn't want to explain anymore. Wasn't it clear enough just now? She owed him. The thing that a woman wore close to her chest and someone had given it to him before. Other than the sachet, what else was there? A belly band? She didn't even think about it. He was a dignified county marquis, a man of indomitable spirit. How could he be so perverted? Mississippi Lou looked at him again and said, I owe you the sachet. I'll return it to you in the future. Forget it, not in the future. I don't want it anymore. Lee rubbed his butt that was still faintly aching. When did she develop this bad habit? Couldn't she find another place to start? You have to take it even if you don't want it. After saying this, Mississippi Lou flipped her hair and left him a cool view of her back. Although she said it directly, it was already 2 months later that he received the sachet from Mississippi Lou. If it was a simple sachet, he could just buy one on the street. However, Mississippi Lou was so picky about his gift. She even asked him to make a new copy of the poem. Of course, she wouldn't be so careless with her gift. The cloth used for the sachet was carefully selected from her collection of cloth. She heard from Xiao Huan that second miss took a full 3 days to choose the spices, and then to embroider something on it, sewing the broken pieces of cloth together. In this period of time, she did not know how much was wasted. That was why it dragged until now. She was very good at fighting with others, but when it came to cooking or needlework, it would greatly lower the level of most women. Li Yi held the sachet sewn by Mississippi Lou. He was very sure that if he wore it out, he would definitely be laughed at by others. However, looking at the eyes of Mississippi Lou, he could only ignore his conscience and nodded, very good, I like it very much. Mississippi Lou's somewhat nervous expression finally eased. She said, it's my first time sewing, there are many places that are not done well, just make do with it. Li nodded and said, there are indeed many places that are not done well. For example, there are some marks in the stitching of the cloth, the color matching is not very good, the stitches are thin and dense, the choice of spices seems to be. Mississippi Lou looked at him calmly, also what? Li Yi hung the sachet on his waist with satisfaction and said, it seems, there is nothing to be picky about. No matter how ugly the sachet sewn by Mississippi Lou was, it was still unique in this world. He either insisted on this truth, or beat her and tell her what was wrong with the choice of spices and the matching. Today, Li did not have the time to fight with her for 300 rounds to correct her mistakes, because today was the day that Lin Wanru and Lin Yong set off to return to the Qi Kingdom. The caravan of merchants from the Qi Kingdom who came along with them had left the capital city long after the Lantern Festival. They had stayed for more than 2 months. If they did not return soon, the Lin family's business in the Qi Kingdom would most likely have an unforeseen event. He had discussed all the details of the cooperation with her a month ago. This time he would also send a caravan of merchants and guards to escort them to the Qi Kingdom. The caravan arrived at the city gate. Rui and Lin Wanru were talking. Rui came down from the carriage and patted her hand saying, it's a long journey from here to the Qi Kingdom. Sister Lin, be careful on the way. Lin Wanru smiled and said, although it's a long journey, we've gone back and forth several times. With these guards escorting us all the way, you don't have to worry, sister. Then she walked to Li Yi's side, looked at him, smiled and stretched out her hand saying, goodbye. Li Yi was stunned, then he also stretched out his hand and the two of them shook hands. Lin Wanru turned her head, looked at Rui and explained, this is a kind of etiquette in our hometown called the handshake ceremony. It's used to greet friends who have not seen each other for a long time, or to bid farewell to friends who are about to be separated? Lin Yong looked at this scene in astonishment. After scratching his head, he also stretched out his hand to Li Yi and said with a sad face, "Li brothers, goodbye." Li Yi punched him hard on the shoulder and said with a smile, "Why are you pulling a long face? It's not like you won't see each other. In less than half a year, I'm afraid you'll have to come back to the capital again." Lin Yong smiled honestly and said embarrassedly, "It's not that I can't bear to part with you, Li brothers." Li Yi smiled and said, "Two men, don't be so sentimental. I can't bear to part with the food cooked by Li brothers." After Lin Yong finished speaking, Li Yi was stunned, then he waved his hand and said, "Let's go, let's go." He watched Lin Yong get into the carriage with a big smile, leaning against the carriage and waving at him. When Lin Wanru bent down to lift the curtain, she looked back and disappeared behind the thick curtain in the next moment. The convoy slowly drove out, and when the last carriage could not be seen, Li Yi turned his head and said, "Let's go back." "Mother?" The city gate was crowded with people and it was noisy, but he and Ru Yi both had extraordinary hearing. How could they not hear this childish and somewhat muffled voice? Ru Yi looked down at the little fellow in the swaddling clothes, and a happy expression appeared on her face. She suddenly looked at Li Yi and asked, "Husband, did you hear that just now?" Chapter 878. Li Yi gently poked the little fellow's soft face and said, "If you want to call me mother, there's no little. Mother?" The two words he said were not clear. They were vague and could barely be distinguished. A 6-month-old child, even if he was gifted or had been guided early, could only say a few more words. It was unlikely that he would understand the meaning. Li Yi guessed that apart from Rui, Xiaohuan was the one who spent the most time with him. She had heard so much that when she forced herself to say it, she would naturally be confused. However, in this way, who was the winner or Rui? In detail, Xiaonyang was also a mother, so Rui was a little better. When he returned home, the proud Lolita had already come over. She bounced out of the yard and asked, "Sir, where did you and Sister Rui go?" The little fellow stretched out her hand from Rui's arms and said vaguely, "Little mother?" Li Yi remembered that when he made the bet with Rui, the proud Lolita was the referee, so she was the one to announce the final result. The proud and pampered Lolita's eyes spun as she said, "But little Duaner didn't call out father or mother." "Sir, and big sister Rui didn't win?" Li Yi pinched her face and asked, "Neither of us won, so who won?" "If neither of us won, then of course the referee won." The proud Lolita said seriously, "So, sir, you have to promise me one thing." "What is it?" As soon as Li Yi said it, he felt that something was wrong. How could there be a referee in a match? However, the proud Lolita didn't give him a chance to change his words. She said with a smile, "I haven't thought about it yet. I'll tell you when I've thought about it." She seemed to be afraid that Li Yi would go back on his words, so she ran away quickly after saying that. Rui looked at him, smiled and said, "Since my husband didn't lose, then the agreement between me and my husband." Li Yi waved his hand and said righteously, "Lil mother is also a mother, so it's still my wife who wins." Walking on the street with the incognito eldest princess and looking at the orderly Jingdo, Li Yi turned his head and asked, "How has the emperor been these 2 days?" Emingzi shook her head and said, "It's better than before, but I'm still resting in bed most of the time." Li Yi didn't know how to continue this topic. The old emperor's health was deteriorating year by year. Even Li Yi himself wasn't confident. A few carriages slowly approached from the front. Li Yi and she moved back a little. Looking at the carriages slowly moving away, Li Yi murmured, "These carriages look a little familiar." Emingzu turned her head to look and said calmly, "An envoy from the Qi kingdom." Li Yi asked in surprise, "Why did the Qi kingdom send an envoy here again?" From what he remembered, ever since the third prince of the Qi kingdom had caused a ruckus in the Jingdo, the envoy from the Qi kingdom had returned. Later on, the friction between the two countries intensified. Even now, there were still occasional disputes on the border. What was the purpose of the Qi kingdom sending an envoy here again at this time? To negotiate for peace. Emingzi looked at the bustling crowd in front of them and said, "The emperor of the Qi kingdom is seriously ill. I'm afraid he doesn't have much time left. The eldest prince and the third prince of the Qi kingdom are locked in a fierce struggle for the throne. The court is also divided into 2 factions that are evenly matched. This time, the envoy from the Qi kingdom has come to the capital on behalf of the eldest prince to negotiate for peace with us. The eldest prince is the crown prince of the Qi kingdom. Even if the Qi kingdom doesn't value the eldest son as much as other countries, the eldest prince has, after all, entered the East Palace. He's the heir apparent in name. There's no lack of support in the court. Why would he need our help? At this delicate moment, the eldest prince had sent an envoy to negotiate for peace. Naturally, it wasn't just to negotiate for peace. It was likely that he wanted to borrow some power from the Jing kingdom to deal with the third prince. For the crown prince to end up like this, it was truly tragic. Emingzu glanced at him and said, "Originally it was indeed like this. Although the third prince of the Qi kingdom has a reputation for being virtuous, he's still the third prince. He doesn't have a legitimate title. However, not long ago the crown prince of the Qi kingdom turned the entire Qi kingdom into a mess. The people's grievances rose everywhere and the hearts of the people were shaken. Many in the court were disappointed in him and turned to support the third prince. That's why the two of them are evenly matched now." "Seems there's such a thing." Li nodded and said, "What did the court officials say?" Emingzu shook her head and said, "They only revealed their intention to negotiate for peace. They haven't formally proposed it yet. My imperial father's health isn't good. He hasn't summoned them these few days. I'm afraid they'll have to wait until my imperial father's next court session." Li didn't have much of an opinion on the matter of negotiating for peace. However, from this matter he could feel the changes in the Jing kingdom over the past 1 or 2 years. He could still remember when he first came to the capital. The carriage driven by the envoy of the Qi kingdom still dared to run amok on the busy streets of the capital. In just 2 short years, the envoy no longer had that kind of arrogance and despotism. He was even more restrained than some of the nobles in the capital. However, when he left the Qi kingdom, he didn't hear anything about the emperor of the Qi kingdom. Could it be that the saying "Ing Hua guards his heart" was really true? It was just that the person Ing Hua was guarding was not the old emperor, but the one in the Qi kingdom. He wasn't so free that he would even worry about the affairs of the Qi kingdom, so he didn't ask more. This time, the princess went out incognito to see the suffering of the people. At the same time, she also went home to get a meal and spar with Mississippi Lu. In the last few spars, Mississippi Lu had always been slightly better. She was usually busy with political affairs, so it was impossible for her to practice martial arts every day like Mississippi Lu. Occasionally she would spar with him. Perhaps she had even learned something from it and progressed quickly. Of course, in this way, the eldest princess had lost both in person and in spirit. Although compared to before the gap between the two had shrunk a lot, after drinking too much soup, the effect was naturally not as obvious. In front of Mississippi Lu, it would be difficult for her to raise her chest in this lifetime. Emingzu casually pointed to the front and said, "In front is the government office of the capital. Let's go in and take a look." Li nodded. He hadn't seen County Magistrate Lu for a long time. He didn't know if the hurdle in his heart had been crossed or not. "You two, what grievances do you have? Don't be anxious. Speak one by one." Sitting in the hall, Jingdo Magistrate Lu Daio gently tapped the gavel and pointed to the two people below. An old man below replied, "Sir, my daughter went to the river to wash clothes yesterday morning and has not returned yet." Hearing this, Lu Daio furrowed his brows and looked at the other person. He asked, "What about you? Why did you report the case?" The man's expression was sorrowful as he said, "My lord, this commoner's wife returned to her parents' home 3 days ago and hasn't returned since. This morning this commoner went to her in-laws' home to inquire, but they said that they had never seen her. My lord, you must uphold justice for this commoner." 2 more have gone missing? Lu Daio's brows furrowed even more. In 1 month, there had been over 10 women who had mysteriously disappeared. He was about to open his mouth to ask more details when his eyes flickered and his body suddenly shook. He quickly walked out and bowed. "Greetings, Your Highness Sir Li." Prime Minister Qin walked out of the door and said to an elegant young man, "After you go back, help me bring a message to the Grand Tutor. Tell him that in 2 days I will come to visit him." "I will certainly bring the message." Chu Ping bowed and said, "I will remember Prime Minister Qin's teachings. I will take my leave today." Prime Minister Qin nodded and said, "Qin Yu, go see Chu Ping off." Qin Yu walked forward and extended his hand. "Brother Chu, please." Chu Ping looked at him and smiled. "Thank you, Brother Qin Yu." Chu Ping walked first and Qin Yu followed behind him. His footsteps were very slow because the young man in front of him seemed to have trouble moving his feet. His steps were deep and shallow and his pace was also very slow. Prime Minister Qin watched the two of them leave and slightly shook his head. The two of them were of the same age, but one of them spent all day visiting the great scholars and learned scholars in the capital, seeking knowledge and dispelling doubts. The other person was a playboy that everyone in the capital hated. In the garden, the large man glanced outside and asked, "Who is that person?" These past few months, he has been coming to our house every few days, the successor of Grand Tutor Chu. He is thirsty for knowledge and is indeed different from those playboys. The middle-aged man's gaze looked in the direction that the young man disappeared in and slowly said. The large man nodded and said, "He looks all right, but his legs are not very nimble." The middle-aged man's gaze was still looking in that direction. After a long time, he withdrew his gaze and looked at the large man. "You've been by my side for 2 years?" The large man scratched his head and said, "I forgot, but it seems so. 2 years is not a short time." The middle-aged man sighed and stood up. He looked at the large man and said, "There is an important matter that I need you to do." The large man revealed a puzzled expression. "What is it?" The middle-aged man waved his hand and the large man moved his ear closer. "Fifth Master, don't worry. Leave this matter to me. There will be no problem." After a moment, the large man's face revealed an excited expression. After patting his chest, he quickly left. The middle-aged man watched him leave. After a long time, he sat down again and took a sip of tea. He muttered, "It has already been 2 years. Chapter 879. In the Yamen, Emingzu frowned and asked, "Within a month there have been more than a dozen cases of women and girls going missing near the capital?" Lu Dayo nodded and said, "Since the first case a month ago, including the 2 today, there have been 13 cases. The security in the capital had always been good, and there were countless heroes of the martial arts world among the people. There were very few major cases. After the first few cases of women going missing, he didn't pay too much attention. But now there were a total of 13 cases. As a small magistrate of the capital, he would soon be unable to handle it. Although the court had repeatedly banned the trafficking of women and children, there were still people who dared to do it under the feet of the Emperor of Jingdo. Li Mingzhu looked at the 2 people in the hall, whose faces were full of sorrow, and turned her head to ask, "Have you found any clues?" Lu Dayo shook his head and said, "I have sent people to investigate many places, and even had the constable stand guard at night. But the thief is very careful and doesn't commit the crime in the same place. Until now there have been no clues." "What did Lu Yizhi say?" Li Yi thought for a moment and looked at him and asked, "Has the case been submitted to the Ministry of Justice?" Lu Dayo shook his head again. "Assistant Minister Lu is busy with work and has a few major cases on hand. I think that if it is not necessary, it is better not to give him trouble." Li nodded and waved his hand, "Go and bring the files of these cases over." Hearing this, Lu Dayo was delighted. He had already seen official Li's ability when he was in Qing and Prefecture. Seeing that the advisor next to him was still in a daze, he kicked him and hurriedly said, "Hurry and bring those files over." Then he looked at Li Yi and Zhang, eldest princess, and said, "Your Highness, official Li, please go to the back hall." In the back hall of the Yamen, Emingzu saw Li Yi flipping through the files without saying a word. She couldn't help but ask, "Did you find anything?" "Don't worry. Do you think I'm the reincarnation of Lord Bao?" Li Yi flipped through the files and turned his head. "Lord Lu, please bring me a map of the vicinity of the capital." County Magistrate Lu was more reliable and didn't have as many questions as Princess Royal. Without saying anything, he quickly asked someone to take out a detailed map. February 13th, Yang Village. Li looked back at County Magistrate Lu and asked, "Where is Yang Village?" County Magistrate Lu casually pointed to a place above, and Li drew a circle at that location. Li flipped open another scroll. 16th of February, Wei Village. "Where is Wei Village?" County Magistrate Lu pointed. "Here." At this moment he had already understood Li Yi's meaning. "Put aside the affairs of the court for now and let the people below do it." Emingzu looked at him and said calmly, "The day after tomorrow is the first day of the first day." Li thought for a while and said with certainty, "Last month was also the first day of the first day." Emingzu said lightly, "On the first day of the first day, you have to go to the morning court. Father specially said that there is only one morning court every month. You won't die if you get up 2 hours earlier." Li just remembered that in the past few months, if the old emperor was not so sick that he couldn't get out of bed, he would still go to the morning court in person on the first day of the month. "Oh, I see. I have to go to the morning court on the first day of the month." Li nodded. When he turned to walk back, he turned back and said, "However, you still have to remember to rest more." In a room of the Qin family, the big man said apologetically, "Fifth Lord, I'm sorry. I can't do that." The middle-aged man looked up at her and asked, "Why?" The big man sighed and said helplessly, "That girl was taken away by the Yamen. I don't dare to stop the people from the yamen. The middle-aged man stood up and asked slowly, which yamen? The capital magistrate's office. The big man said angrily, the people from the capital magistrate's office are too despicable. That girl's sister died some time ago, and she went to the yamen to complain. She was arrested and locked up for 2 months. She was only released for 4 hours and then she was taken back again. They said that she stole something from the magistrate. Isn't this nonsense? Fifth Lord, I'm sorry, I couldn't protect her. She stole something from the magistrate and was arrested again? The middle-aged man murmured and sat down slowly. After a long time he waved his hand and said, It's okay, it's not your fault. The big man asked curiously, Fifth Lord, who is the girl you asked me to protect? The middle-aged man sighed and said, She is a pitiful person. The big man nodded repeatedly, She's quite pitiful. Why don't those officials have any sympathy? The middle-aged man waved his hand casually, You can leave first. The big man responded, retreated to the door and closed it. The middle-aged man lowered his head. After a long time, a smile appeared on his face and he murmured, Sing Shichen, Sing Shichen. Chapter 880. The morning court of the Jing kingdom had long been reduced to a mere formality. There were 3 provinces and 6 ministries to maintain the operation of the imperial court. In fact, there was no need for an emperor. Some important decisions could not be decided by the subordinates, and the eldest princess would be the judge. If even the eldest princess could not make a decision, she would have to ask the old emperor for his opinion. On the first day of every month, the ceremonial morning court would be held. If there was nothing very important, the old emperor would only show up for a short while. Her Highness the Princess, who assisted the government, sat on the lower left side of the old emperor to distinguish her status. But now, the position where Li Yi stood in the court could no longer be leaned against the pillar. His position was only behind the 2 prime ministers, and was equal to the ministers of the 6 ministries. Listening to the reports of the officials in the court, Lin Mingya felt a little sleepy. Suddenly, he heard the sharp and thin voice of a eunuch. Summon the envoy of the Qi kingdom for an audience. These days, the envoy of the Qi kingdom had been very well behaved in the capital city. He was so well behaved that he did not seem to be the envoy of the Qi kingdom. But according to the rumors they revealed, this time they came to seek peace. It was normal for them to be well behaved. The envoy of the Qi kingdom stepped into the main hall. After standing still, he bowed and said in a loud voice, Greetings, Your Majesty. The envoy of the Qi kingdom had a proper attitude and a humble expression, which made the officials of the Jing kingdom feel refreshed. Because of the great power of the Qi kingdom, even when the envoy was sent in the past, his attitude was extremely arrogant in the presence of the emperor and ministers of the Jing kingdom. Compared with his attitude now, it was like the difference between cloud and mud. And the reason for all these changes was very clear in their hearts. The Qi kingdom and the Zhao kingdom had repeatedly invaded the border. Each time they were beaten back by the generals and soldiers of the Jing kingdom. After losing several cities, the Zhao kingdom finally calmed down and quietly retreated. The envoy who was sent to discuss the redemption of those cities was still hanging in the office of the Chamberlain of Dependencies. The envoys of the Qi kingdom got straight to the point. After a few ceremonial words they went straight to the point. The gist of it was that the Jing kingdom and the Qi kingdom were neighbors. How many people would die and how much money would be wasted if they were to fight each other all the time? How much money would be wasted? How about the 2 kingdoms shake hands and make peace from now on? They would respect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity, not invade each other's territory, and not interfere with each other's internal affairs? They would be equal and mutually beneficial, and they would coexist peacefully. As soon as he said this, not only did Emperor Jing stand up from his throne, but the court was also in an uproar. The biggest foreign threat of the Jing kingdom was the Qi kingdom. The 2 kingdoms had been fighting for decades, and the Jing kingdom was the weaker one. Over the past decades, the Qi kingdom had asked for peace several times, paying a heavy price for it. This time, it was the Qi kingdom's turn to ask for peace. This was the first time. As the subjects of the Jing kingdom, their hearts were filled with a sense of belonging and pride. Had the Jing kingdom of today grown to the point that even the Qi kingdom dared not underestimate it? Without waiting for the subjects of the Jing kingdom to say anything, the leader of the envoys bowed and stepped forward. He said in a loud voice, To show our sincerity, on behalf of the crown prince of the Qi kingdom, we ask His Majesty the Emperor to marry the eldest princess of your kingdom. We also promise that after the crown prince ascends to the throne, We will immediately confer the title of imperial concubine to Her Highness. As soon as he said this, the court, which had been a little noisy, immediately quieted down. Someone was startled for a moment, then frowned. Some people were stunned at first, and then their faces showed a look of wild joy. Li looked at the envoy who was holding the letter of credence from the Qi kingdom, then raised his head to look up. The old emperor frowned. Her Highness the princess was expressionless. She retracted her gaze, and there was not much change in her expression. Someone immediately stepped forward and said bluntly, "Your Majesty, we can negotiate for peace, but the crown prince of the Qi kingdom must never marry the eldest princess." I second the motion. I second the motion. As soon as Prime Minister Qin said this, many people in the court stepped forward. The Qi kingdom taking the initiative to negotiate for peace was, of course, a very honorable thing to do. If word of this got out, it would raise the prestige of the kingdom. But for the crown prince of the Qi kingdom to marry the eldest princess, it would be a fool's dream. The importance of Her Highness the princess to the Jing kingdom was self-evident. It could even be said that although she was a princess, she played the role of a monarch. Moreover, she was a wise monarch that was rarely seen in decades. Without Her Highness the princess, what would become of the imperial court of the Jing kingdom? Normal people would not do such a thing to give such a wise monarch to the Qi kingdom for nothing. As for negotiating for peace, the Qi kingdom did not want to discuss it. After all, they could not defeat the soldiers of the Jing kingdom who had celestial punishment. In short, peace could not be discussed, but marrying the princess was out of the question. Cui Qingming looked at the old man who stepped forward. His expression was calm, but his fists were tightly clenched in his sleeves. He tilted his head to look, and an official stepped forward and said, "Your Majesty, if the two countries go to war, how many people will be plunged into misery and suffering? How many brave soldiers of the Jing kingdom will be sacrificed? Now that the Qi kingdom has proposed to negotiate for peace, it is a blessing for the people. I hope that your Majesty will reconsider." After this official spoke, many people stepped forward to agree. Both sides stuck to their own views and argued endlessly. Emperor Jing put down the letter of credence and pressed his hand down. The imperial court immediately returned to silence. "We can negotiate for peace, but don't mention the marriage proposal again," he said plainly, showing his most obvious attitude. The envoy of the Qi kingdom raised his head and said, "Negotiating for peace is a matter that benefits both countries. The Qi kingdom has shown enough sincerity. Your country should also show some sincerity, right?" As soon as he said this, all the officials in the imperial court looked at the envoy of the Qi kingdom with unfriendly gazes. The envoy of the Qi kingdom was implying that if the Jing kingdom did not marry the eldest princess to the Jing kingdom and did not show enough sincerity, then there was no need to discuss the peace. "Your Majesty, this matter is beneficial to the people. Please reconsider. Your Majesty, don't let the people be plunged into misery and suffering again. Your Majesty, please think of the people of the Jing kingdom and the soldiers at the front line." When a few more people stepped forward, Emperor Jing frowned and looked at a certain place below. Li stepped forward at the right time and looked at those people. He asked, "Accepting the Qi kingdom's negotiation for peace and marrying the eldest princess to the Jing kingdom is to save millions of people and prevent the people from being plunged into misery and suffering?" The leader of the group scoffed coldly and said, "If it can prevent the war between the two countries, why not? Then, in the end, can it be avoided?" Li looked at him and then at the people around him. He asked again, "The Jing kingdom and the Qi kingdom have negotiated for peace so many times. Did they really achieve what this lord said?" The official was speechless. If negotiating for peace was really useful, it would have been enough to negotiate for peace once. The envoy of the Qi kingdom would not have appeared in the hall now. Li looked at the courtiers in the hall and said, "Everyone knows that the Qi kingdom has the heart of a tiger and a wolf. They have abandoned the treaty more than once. What credibility do they have? Moreover, your Majesty is ill and the eldest princess is assisting you in ruling the country. This is a critical time. How can you marry the Qi kingdom? Moreover, the crown prince of the Qi kingdom has lost the support of the people and may not even be able to sit on the throne. What right do you have to make such a promise?" "Haha, you're right, you're right." Old General Shui laughed and walked out. He said, "Sincerity? What sincerity do you want? Do you want Tianfa?" Another old general walked out and laughed. He said, "The Qi kingdom is the invader. What's there to talk about negotiating for peace? If you want to retreat, do it quickly. If you want to fight, the soldiers of the Jing kingdom will not be afraid of you." Prime Minister Shen stood out and nodded. He said, Your Majesty, I think Dr. Li is right. The Minister of War Yan Bing stepped forward and said, I agree. The Minister of Revenue Qin Huan stood beside him. I agree. The Minister of Left Minister Dong Wenyun. Those who stepped forward were all important courtiers in the imperial court. The two prime ministers had the same opinion. The Xin family and the Wang family were also standing behind Jinzi Guanglu. The opinions of others were actually insignificant. Cui Qingming looked at the row of people standing in front of him. He clenched his fists so tightly that his nails dug deep into his palms. Soon he loosened his fists helplessly. Regarding the negotiation for peace with the envoy of the Qi kingdom, the opinions of the big shots in the imperial court were unanimous. Peace could be negotiated, but marrying the eldest princess was out of the question. If it worked, they could negotiate. If it didn't work, they could get out. The Qi kingdom was still the Qi kingdom of the past. But the Jing kingdom was no longer the weak Jing kingdom of the past. Li ate a mouthful of egg-fried rice. He looked at the eldest princess and said, You are right. The negotiation for peace with the envoy of the Qi kingdom is fake. They want to use this opportunity to get the help of the Jing kingdom to help the eldest prince ascend the throne. Emingzu held the wine cup, but she didn't eat. She didn't seem to be in a good mood. She looked at him and asked, What do you think about the peace marriage? Li thought for a while and said, Peace marriage? Discord is moral integrity. Peace is also a diplomatic method. As for how I think about it, it can't be generalized. This is what you usually use to fool father. Emingzu swirled the wine cup and said, I want to listen to your heart. Heart. Li raised his wine cup and clinked it with her. He said without hesitation, I don't care if it's the Qi kingdom or the Zhao kingdom. Of course, I won't let you marry them. Chapter 881. The emperor and ministers of the Jing kingdom had firmly rejected the proposal of the envoy from the Qi kingdom. There was no hesitation, which meant that there was no room for negotiation. The eldest princess was not only the eldest princess. She also knew many secrets of the Jing kingdom, including Tianfa, which could not be known to outsiders. These secrets could never be leaked to the Qi kingdom. Not to mention that the current situation in the court depended on the princess. Without the eldest princess, the construction of the academy would come to a standstill. The implementation of the marriage policy would also encounter huge obstacles. The envoy from the Qi kingdom did not propose any more peace talks. The morning court session ended on bad terms. After returning to the office of the Grand Herald, he was not in a hurry to leave, as if he still had a glimmer of hope. As the current leader of the Cui family, Cui Qingming's face darkened the moment he stepped out of the palace. The envoy from the Qi kingdom is seeking peace with the intention of marrying the eldest princess. This is an opportunity that we cannot miss. We cannot let it go like this. After hearing the news, a man from the Cui family walked out anxiously and said hurriedly, Li, this kid has already grown up. Cui Qingming pressed his palm heavily on the table and murmured, You didn't see the scene in the court today. Just relying on the remaining power of our Cui family in the court is no longer enough to contend against him. But as soon as the man spoke, someone hurried in and said, There is news from the palace. Her ladyship sent a message. Cui Qingming stood up and looked at the lady official who walked into the room with everyone else. The lady official glanced at Cui Qingming and the others. There was no expression on her face. She said calmly, Her ladyship asked me to ask you, Lord Cui, what are you waiting for? Cui Qingming clenched his fists. After a while, he nodded and said, Tell her ladyship that I know what to do. The 6-month-old Li Duan was already restless. Although he could not walk, he could already turn over on his own. He could even walk when supported by an adult. Li planned to build a carriage for the child to learn how to walk. It should be ready in 2 months at most. Emingzu Li is going to be married off to the Qi kingdom? When he was sketching in the room, Mississippi Lu suddenly walked in and asked out of the blue. Li raised his head to look at her, then lowered his head and asked casually, Who told you that? Mississippi Lu walked over and took a look. She stood aside and said, It's just a rumor. Li shook his head and said, Don't worry, she won't marry anyone who marries to the Qi kingdom. Even if she wants to, she can't. No one in the imperial court will agree to it. Mississippi Lu crossed her arms and murmured, A 19-year-old princess should have married long ago. Li raised his head and looked at her in surprise. If I remember correctly, you seem to be a few days older than her, right? Mississippi Lu turned to look at him and nodded. You're right. So what are you trying to say? I told you my memory can't be wrong. Li Yi lowered his head and continued to draw the blueprint. He murmured, "It's good that she's older, it's good that she's older." After drawing the blueprint, the next thing to do was to make and polish it. The finished product still needed to be tested and adjusted, but these could be left to the craftsman. If it wasn't for Mississippi Lu's reminder, Li Yi wouldn't have realized that she was already 19 years old. Even Xiao Huan had crossed the threshold of 17 years old. She was much more sensible and was about to become a young lady. Only that Sundara Lolita was still the same as when they first met. It seemed that she hadn't changed at all. She was still as playful as before. She could even play with the 6-month-old Li Duan. This also saved her and Rui a lot of trouble. Li Yi walked into the room and saw the little fellow lying on his back on the bed. That Sundara Lolita was lying by the bed, blinking her big eyes and looking curiously at the even smaller thing in the little fellow's split pants. Finally, at a certain moment, she couldn't help but reach out and pull it. County Magistrate Lu supported his chin with one hand. There was a thick file in front of him, but his mind wasn't on it. His eyes were blurred. His upper and lower eyelids touched each other and quickly opened again. In the past month, more than 10 cases of missing women had attracted the attention of the higher-ups. They had strictly ordered him to solve the cases within a time limit. However, a few days had passed and there was no news of those thieves. He hadn't slept for a day and a night since last night. "Your Excellency, good news, good news." Seeing a Yamen runner running in from outside with a face full of surprise, County Magistrate Lu quivered. He immediately stood up and asked, "Is there any progress in the case?" The Yamen runner shook his head and said, "It's the young master's appointment. The young master has been hired by the Ministry of Revenue." County Magistrate Lu waved his hand weakly. The officials of the Ministry of Revenue had already discussed this matter with him. After that good-for-nothing boy entered the mathematics college, he was enlightened and graduated with excellent grades. He didn't lose face for County Magistrate Lu. This time he went to the Ministry of Revenue to temper himself, so he didn't need to worry about his future anymore. He waved his hand and said, "I see. You can go now." He was so sleepy that he lay on the table and planned to rest for a while. Not long after he closed his eyes, a thunderous voice rang in his ears again. "Your Excellency, good news?" County Magistrate Lu patted the table and didn't even bother to open his eyes. He said, "Okay, I see. You can go now. I'll sleep for a while." After lying on the table and closing his eyes for a while, he felt a little refreshed. He picked up the file and was about to read it. Seeing that the Yamen runner was still standing below, he asked, "Anything else?" "Your Excellency, what should we do next?" County Magistrate Lu frowned and said, "What next?" "Detective Zhao has found some clues about the missing woman. He came back to ask you for your opinion. When did you find it?" County Magistrate Lu suddenly stood up from his seat and asked, "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" The Yamen runner was stunned and said, "Didn't you say that you already knew?" County Magistrate Lu had been worried about this matter these days. There was progress in the case, but they didn't tell him immediately. What if, during this period of time something happened? He glared at the Yamen runner and said, gritting his teeth, "Say it." The Yamen runner trembled and immediately said, "Thanks to your guidance, we followed your method and narrowed the scope of the secret investigation. As expected, we found some problems in a place outside the city. Great scholar Sun has studied scriptures all his life. Although he isn't as good as Qinwen, he still has unique insights in some aspects. He is far away from the downtown area and lives in a hut outside the city. It took you a lot of effort to find him. Go now." Chu Ping bowed respectfully and said, "I'll take my leave." Pinger's leg. Watching Chu Ping limp away, the middle-aged man stood beside Grand Tutor Chu and sighed. "That's a human life, a living human life." Grand Tutor Chu watched Chu Ping leave and shook his head. "And he only injured one of his legs from kneeling. I only hope that he can remember this lesson and not repeat the same mistake." The middle-aged man nodded and said, "He has been studying wholeheartedly these days. He has always been aware of his mistakes and has the intention to change." As soon as he finished speaking, a servant from the Chu family came to report that Cui Qingming from the Cui family had come to visit. Chapter 882. Grand Tutor, the Qi Kingdom has taken the initiative to seek peace. This has never happened since the founding of the country. Once we stop fighting the Qi Kingdom, our Jing Kingdom will be able to take this opportunity to recuperate and grow stronger. In the Chu household, Cui Qingming's face was full of excitement, but it suddenly turned fierce. "But that scoundrel harbors evil intentions and has bewitched His Majesty. Even Prime Minister Qin and Prime Minister Shen, the old generals and many important ministers have been deceived by his flowery words. If we miss this golden opportunity, our losses will be immeasurable. Grand Tutor Chu sat in his seat with a calm expression. When Cui Qingming finished speaking, he looked at him and said calmly, "In my life I have seen the Jing Kingdom and the Qi Kingdom seek peace 3 times. In the end, the way of the world is still the way of the world. There is always war ahead, and the Qi Kingdom's wild ambition will never be satisfied. But the weak have never had the right to negotiate. The enmity between the Jing Kingdom and the Qi Kingdom cannot be resolved with a peace treaty. The situation in the Qi Kingdom is chaotic now. We only need to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. There is no need to interfere. Moreover, a crown prince of the Qi Kingdom who has not ascended the throne cannot represent the Qi Kingdom. But I know what to do. You need not say more." Grand Tutor Chu picked up the teacup on the table. It was clear that he was sending the guest off. Cui Qingming swallowed the words he wanted to say. His expression returned to normal. He slowly rose and said, "This junior bids his farewell." He walked out of the hall and walked back the way he came. Just as he was about to step out of the Chu household's gate, he heard hurried footsteps behind him. Brother Cui." A middle-aged man caught up with him and said, "My father has been in a bad mood these days. If he has said anything overboard, I hope Brother Cui will not take it to heart." "How could that be?" Cui Qingming smiled and said, "Grand Tutor has always been like this. How could I not know? Today Grand Tutor's words have enlightened me. There are some things that I need to carefully think about." The middle-aged man was relieved. That's good. At the Chu family's entrance, Cui Qingming looked up at the nation's literary bones plaque. After a long while, he turned around and boarded the carriage. The coachman leaned against the carriage and lifted the curtain slightly. He whispered, "Second master, the Yamen's people seem to have found that place." Cui Qingming frowned. "So fast?" The man nodded and said, "Today the constables sent by the government are already 5 miles away from that place. I'm afraid they will find us soon. We have to move as soon as possible." Cui Qingming lifted the curtains of the window and looked in the direction of the Chu family again. He leaned against the carriage and said faintly, "If they want to investigate, then let them. Go to the capital governor's manor." The coachman lowered the curtain and said in a low voice, "I understand. Outside the capital in a certain village in front of the grass at the village entrance." Chu Ping bowed slightly to the white-haired old man in front of him. "Many thanks to Great Scholar Sunday. Today, with Great Scholar Sun's guidance, Chu Ping has benefited greatly. The younger generation will surpass us in time. We are old now. The future belongs to you young people." The old man stroked his white beard and said, "Send my regards to the Grand Tutor. I will pay a visit another day. I bid you farewell, elder." "I won't be sending you off." Chu Ping walked all the way to the village entrance. There were already people waiting there. A well-dressed young man stretched out his hand and pointed at the carriage beside him. He smiled and said, "Master Chu, please." On a high hill outside the village, a constable was lying in the grass. He put away the cylindrical object in front of him and furrowed his brows. They had been following that carriage all day, but from the logo on it, it belonged to a small noble family in the capital. This matter was a bit troublesome to deal with. He turned his head and said in a low voice, "Keep a close watch here. I will go back and report to the master." At the same time in the capital governor's manor, Zheng Shichen put down his teacup and looked at Cui Qingming. "You don't have to worry about that woman. To prevent her from causing trouble outside, I have already locked her up in prison. As long as we find a reason she can be locked up like this." Cui Qingming nodded and said, "The matter I mentioned just now, don't worry. I will also have people keep a close eye on that place. There won't be any delays. This matter is very important. I will leave it to Brother Tseng." Zheng Shichen looked at him and said solemnly, "Brother Cui can rest assured that I will handle this matter. Bide your time." Li Yi crumpled a piece of paper into a ball and threw it into the lake. He didn't quite understand the 4 words that Zheng Shichen had sent him. The arrival of the Qi Kingdom's envoy to the capital was a great opportunity that couldn't be more obvious. Inciting public opinion, colluding with the court officials to force the abdication of the throne, pressuring the emperor, and so on. With a whole set of gifts, the Cui family and their accomplices were almost finished. But if others didn't make a move, it wouldn't be good for him to make the first move. In this way, Lord Tseng's words of "bide your time" seemed a little out of the blue. He didn't finish his words, and this half was unclear and vague, which was really annoying. Her Royal Highness threw a stone at the lake, leaving a long mark on the surface of the lake. It flew to the other side and disappeared. She asked casually, "This time what other reason can they think of?" Li imitated her and threw a stone. The stone sank into the lake with a thud. "I don't know." He shook his head and thought for a moment. Suddenly he said, "Why don't we be a little more ruthless?" Emingzi looked at him and asked, "How ruthless?" Li pointed at the ripples on the surface of the lake and said, "Take advantage of the quiet night, when the moon is dark and the wind is strong, and send a few masters to kidnap Cui Qingzi, Cui Qingming, and a few other important figures of the Cui family, and then..." Li threw another stone into the lake. Emingzi looked at the ripples on the surface of the lake and asked, "What if Grand Tutor Chu stands out and opposes?" Another thump came from the surface of the lake. "Noble Consort Cui? But what about all the opposing officials in the court and all the people in the world?" "Then forget it." Li shook his head and lay on the lawn with his hands behind his head. He sighed and said, "In this way the fish in this lake can't be eaten in the future. Therefore this kind of thing couldn't be rushed." Her side still had to take the righteous side, and basically could only rely on the other side to court death. This was very passive and not easy. As a friend he did this for her. If she didn't reward him with a very, very high official title in the future, even the heavens wouldn't be able to bear it. Emingzi knew that he was just joking. She imitated him and lay on the lawn with her hands behind her head, looking at the blue sky. At this moment, all the heavy court affairs seemed to be completely erased from her mind like the cloudless sky. Li turned sideways and was about to say something. His mouth opened halfway and his whole body froze. When she lay on the lawn with her hands behind her head, the clothes on her chest tightened, revealing a seductive curve. The two of them were very close to each other. Because of the perspective at this moment, Li couldn't tell who was the winner between her and Mississippi Lu. In the small pavilion in the lake, Li Xian sighed. He always felt that there was something between Li and Emingzi that he didn't know besides the love between a man and a woman. Unfortunately, the two of them denied it every time. He couldn't get any useful information from either of them. Beside him, the proud Lolita held her chin with her hands and looked in the same direction as him. She also sighed slowly. "Don't you think so?" the person on the left said, but didn't get an immediate response from the person next to him. When he turned his head, he saw a knife pressed against the person's neck. A look of terror appeared on his face, and he was just about to scream when he felt a cold sensation on his neck. "Don't talk. Lead the way." As the cold voice fell, there were noisy footsteps in the surroundings. The two Yamans had sent out dozens of bailiffs for this serious case. Although the Peng family had many guards and servants, they didn't dare to resist the officials. How could they resist? In a short period of time, everyone was chased into the courtyard. A few bailiffs entered the inner courtyard and kicked open a door. When they saw the injured woman tied up in the room, their faces were filled with anger. "Put her down first," the leader of the bailiffs said. Immediately, two bailiffs walked over, untied the woman, and wrapped her in a blanket. Inside the room, the naked man was so scared that he couldn't even speak properly. He said in a trembling voice, What are you doing?" The bailiffs picked up the whip beside him and whipped him in the face. He said angrily, "Put him on and take him away." At the same time, the sound of doors being kicked open could be heard from every room in the inner courtyard. In the corner, a few bailiffs kicked open the door and rushed in. When they saw the man in the room, they were startled and blurted out, "Young Master Chu, why, it's you again." Chu Ping looked back and threw the burning candle in his hand to the ground. He looked at the door indifferently. The bailiff's expression changed and immediately said, "Quick, close the door." The case of the missing women that had attracted a lot of attention in the capital had finally been solved. After the women were kidnapped, they were forced into prostitution by the Peng family just to satisfy some perverted animal desires. When the Yamen bailiffs found the Peng family, there were still many people in the room who were doing the beastly things. They were caught on the spot and put on black hoods. They were stuffed into carriages and sent to the Yamen. The abused women were immediately sent to the Women's Medical Center for treatment. Watching the carriages leave, one bailiff said indignantly, "We were the ones who worked hard these days." In the end, the credit was taken by the Yamen. "What? Shut up." Someone beside him tugged at his arm and said, "Are you blind? Those people who were brought out just now are clearly not ordinary people. Do you think our master would be willing to do something like this?" The bailiffs came to his senses. When he walked through a few rooms he saw a few familiar faces. They were clearly some of the foppish young masters who often appeared in the capital. His master really couldn't afford to offend the powers behind these people. He clenched his fists tightly, but in the end he could only sigh and say, "Damn it, I still don't feel good." The banquet at the Chu family had already begun. The middle-aged man looked at the empty seat below and said in confusion, "Strange, it's already so late. Why hasn't Ping returned yet?" Grand Tutor Chu said calmly, "There are many things about Sun Zhongxiu that he can learn from. It's fine for him to come back later." The middle-aged man nodded and said, "Pinger has been working much harder than before." Just as he finished speaking, a servant ran in frantically and said in fear, "Master, there's a letter from the capital Yamen. Something big has happened, something big has happened." The middle-aged man frowned and said, "Just what happened? Tell me slowly." The servant handed over a piece of paper. After the middle-aged man finished reading it, he suddenly stood up from his seat and flipped over his chair. The dining table also shook violently. Soup splattered everywhere and countless chopsticks fell to the ground. His face was pale. He gripped the paper tightly and murmured, "Unfilial son, unfilial son." Grand Tutor Chu slowly stood up and looked at him. He said, "Give me the letter." The middle-aged man held the letter and a hint of hesitation appeared on his face. "Give me the letter." Grand Tutor Chu repeated. Hearing this, the middle-aged man could only respectfully hand over the letter. Grand Tutor Chu took the letter. At first his expression was rather calm. However, not long after, his breathing began to quicken and he gripped the letter tightly. His eyes were bloodshot and his beard was trembling incessantly. The middle-aged man hurriedly walked over and gently patted his back. He said hurriedly, Father, calm down, calm down. Don't be angry and harm your health. Bastard. The descendants of the Chu family have been upright for generations. How could we have produced such a bastard?" After a sorrowful voice, the middle-aged man cried out anxiously, Father, someone quickly go get a doctor." Chapter 884. That bastard, where is that bastard now? Grand Tutor Chu had already woken up before the doctor arrived and asked in a trembling voice. The servant replied in a trembling voice, "The magistrate's office said that they did not reveal young master's identity. They should be sending young master home soon." As soon as he finished speaking, a servant announced that Lord Zheng and Lord Shui had come to visit. In the distance a few figures walked over. At the very front were two middle-aged men, and behind them was Chu Ping who was limping over. "Lord Grand Tutor, kneel." Chui Qingming had just opened his mouth when he was shocked by the furious Lord Grand Tutor and swallowed the words he wanted to say. Blah. Chu Ping was expressionless as he knelt on the blue stone. "Bastard, how did our Chu family produce such a bastard like you?" Grand Tutor Chu's expression was somewhat ferocious as he raised his walking stick and fiercely struck Chu Ping's shoulder. "This old man will beat you to death today so that my Chu family's ancestors won't be humiliated." Chu Ping's body swayed but he did not dodge. A cold smile appeared on his face as he said, "Then beat me to death. I'm a cripple anyway. It's a stain on the Chu clan's reputation. It's better if I die. Death is the end of all troubles." Grand Tutor Chu was stunned as he looked at the grandson he had raised since he was a child. He found that after only a few months he actually did not recognize him. He raised his walking stick but did not lower it for a long time. He murmured, "My Chu family has 100 years of good reputation, 100 years of good reputation. 100 years of good reputation." A bitter smile appeared on Chu Ping's face. "Yes, 100 years of good reputation. As long as you beat me to death, the Chu family will still be the Chu family. The Chu family that is praised by everyone will not lose 100 years of good reputation." He stretched his head out and smiled, "Come, grandfather, I'm ready." Grand Tutor Chu looked at him, his body trembling. The walking stick in his hand could not be lowered. Ping, he put down his walking stick and bent down, using his withered hands to caress Chu Ping's face. His old eyes were filled with tears as he said in a trembling voice, "Ping, how did you become like this?" Chu Ping didn't reply. A pained expression appeared on his face and he closed his eyes. When he opened them again they were devoid of emotion. He stood up from the ground and without giving Grand Tutor Chu another glance, he limped back inside. The middle-aged man behind Grand Tutor Chu stepped forward, looked at Zheng Shichen and asked anxiously, "Lord Zheng, what is going on?" Zheng Shichen shook his head and said, "Today the magistrate's office received news that many cases of women going missing in recent days were committed by the Ping family of Pinggan County. Seng Shichen looked at him and said, hand over Chu Ping and the Chu family will still be the Chu family. Chui Qingming shook his head and said, before today hand over Chu Ping and the Chu family will still be the Chu family. After today the Chu family's reputation for 100 years will be in our hands. As for the choice, Grand Tutor is a smart man. He will know what to do. Father, what should we do? In the dark great hall, the person in charge of the Chu family on the surface walked in and looked at the figure in the depths of the darkness. After a long time, a hoarse voice came from the darkness. How is Ping-er? He has already fallen asleep, the middle-aged man replied. No sound came from the darkness. I was wrong from the very beginning. After a long time, a sigh came from the darkness. The old man muttered, I didn't expect the Chui family to be so vicious. Those are living human lives, living human beings? The middle-aged man looked at him in a daze, his face filled with disbelief. Father, you mean, they have already destroyed Ping-er, and now they want to destroy our Chu family? The old man slowly turned his head and looked at the ancestral tablets of the Chu family in the darkness. He muttered, they want to destroy the reputation that our Chu family has built up over generations. The middle-aged man's body trembled as he said anxiously, Father, you mustn't. You mustn't. The Chu family's reputation for 100 years must not be destroyed in our hands. He gritted his teeth and said with great difficulty, if it really doesn't work, then hand over Ping-er. Grand Tutor Chu shook his head and said, after they sent Ping-er back twice, this is no longer Ping-er's problem. The middle-aged man took a few steps back and muttered, could it be that our Chu family? Grand Tutor Chu lit the candles in the room and straightened his clothes. He said, make preparations. In a few days I will be meeting a few old friends. Mingzi thought about it for a moment and nodded. Li Mingzhu pondered for a moment and nodded. That's right. There's really no difference between the two of you? Li Yi thought for a moment and said, although it's an unjust case, without you I wouldn't have been able to get the court to admit the mistake. If it's Miss Zheng, the court has wronged her, so she doesn't need to thank me. Mingzi looked at Li Yi calmly and said, if it's you, if it's me, I won't say it. Li Yi waved his hand and said, between us, you should be the one thanking me. And if you really want to thank me, I'm afraid you won't be able to finish it in your lifetime. Mingzi crossed her arms in front of her chest and murmured, there's still a long lifetime. Li Yi looked over. At this moment, he suddenly had the urge to call Mississippi Lu over and stand shoulder to shoulder with her. That way it would be clear who won and who lost. When Li Yi saw Mississippi Lu, she was reading in her room. Mississippi Lu was reading a book. This was a phenomenon even rarer than the Antares guarding the heart. Other than those secret scrolls that only had pictures but no words, Li Yi had never seen her seriously read any book. Although Mississippi Lu was literate, she didn't know much. There were even 2 words in the green jade case that she didn't know. It was hard to imagine how she would remember to read something like the Analects of Confucius. She held the book in her hands and seemed to have encountered something she couldn't understand. Her brows furrowed and she quickly flipped through a few pages. Then she quickly turned back and looked at it again and again. Finally, she grabbed the book impatiently and waved her hand. Only then did a relaxed expression appear on her face. Li Yi took the book that Mississippi Lu had thrown out the door and walked into the room to put it back. He asked, why are you reading this kind of book? Mississippi Lu glanced at him and said, I'm just flipping through it casually. Li Yi knew that she was definitely not flipping through it casually, because on the table in her room, in addition to the Analects of Confucius, there were 2 other books, such as The Great University and The Doctrine of the Mean. At the very front was the latest edition of the Mingyue collection, which was compiled by those busybodies after sorting out the poems that he had thrown out. Since the Lantern Festival, the number of pages of this poetry collection had increased by 1. In addition to this book, there was also a thick notes on the Mingyue collection. He flipped through it casually and found that there were 17 or 18 notes on each poem. Those people really had nothing better to do. Mississippi Lu looked at the thick notes in his hand and raised her head to ask, in your heart, is that Miss Zuemo really so perfect that you would praise her with more than a dozen poems? There was no way to answer this question. At that time, the relationship between the 2 of them was still a pure relationship between a man and a woman. He had only given her these poems because he wanted to help her. He had never thought so much. But now, it seemed that every single one of them was a naked love poem. When these heavyweight poems were released, they praised her to the point that she was rare in the heavens and hard to find in the mortal world, like a fairy. Then, the other fairies seemed to be a little unhappy. Hey, you've changed your perfume today. What's the smell? It smells quite nice. Li changed the topic without any trace. Mississippi Lu did not answer, and the atmosphere was a little awkward. Well, I heard the news about Yang Liuking in the palace today. Li spoke again. He looked at her and asked, "Do you want to hear it?" "Not interested." Mississippi Lu said lightly and then said, "But if you really want to tell me, I can reluctantly listen." "I don't really want to say it." Li waved his hand and said, "Read your book first, I'll call you when it's time to eat." Instead of learning the good things, he actually learned to be arrogant from the Tsundra Lolita. The Tsundra Lolita was only arrogant now, but she became arrogant and reluctantly listened. When he walked to the door, Mississippi Lu's voice came again. "How about, before we eat, I reluctantly teach you a few more moves?" Li turned around and walked back. He said, "I feel that I've advanced too quickly recently. It's better to stabilize it so I won't learn anything new." Mississippi Lu looked at him and asked, "About her, what did Emingzi say to you?" Speaking of the princess, Li thought of something. He looked at her and said, "There's no rush for this. A few days ago Su taught me 2 moves. One of them I haven't figured out yet." Mississippi Lu's face showed a look of interest. "Which move?" Li crossed his arms and said, "You first do what I do." A look of doubt appeared on Mississippi Lu's pretty face, but she still copied him and crossed her arms. She asked, "And then?" "That's it." Li looked her up and down. He shook his head for the Princess Royal and said, "Just now I suddenly figured it out." Chapter 886. The situation in the Wu Kingdom is different from ours. The current emperor of the Wu Kingdom killed his brother and father. He didn't get the throne with a proper reason and didn't win the hearts of the people. He was despised by the scholars in the Wu Kingdom. Although he used force to clean up some of them, the whole Wu Kingdom was in great turmoil. Li looked at Mississippi Lu and said slowly, "Today more than half of the places in the Wu Kingdom are out of the control of the imperial court. Among them there are forces loyal to the former emperor of the Wu Kingdom, and there are bandits who took advantage of the chaos. In short, the Wu Kingdom is in a mess, very messy." Princess Duanrong, who disappeared mysteriously after the emperor of the Wu Kingdom seized power, returned to the Wu Kingdom a year ago. She gathered a few generals who rebelled against the current imperial court and also gathered a considerable force. They cleaned up the bandits who occupied the mountains and made themselves kings, and at the same time strengthened their force to fight against the imperial court. Li looked into her eyes and said, "You don't have to worry too much. There are many people around your apprentice now. Although it's not possible to overthrow the entire imperial court, they can still protect themselves." "I see." Mississippi Lu nodded and turned to walk outside. "Where are you going?" Li asked hurriedly. Although she didn't show anything in the past year, Mississippi Lu only taught her one precious apprentice with all her heart. How could she not care about her? If she were in the Wu Kingdom now, she would have already led the masters of the Lu League to break into the imperial palace and take the head of the emperor of the Wu Kingdom. Mississippi Lu turned around and said, "I'll go ask Chief Su what tricks he taught you 2 days ago." Li's expression changed. This was more dangerous than her breaking into the imperial palace. He quickly walked in front of her and changed the topic. "Rui, do you remember the Taoist who followed us back from the Qi Kingdom?" "Of course I remember." Mississippi Lu glanced at him. She had only met a few grandmasters. How could she forget? "I heard from Su that the Taoist priest was about the same age as Su, but he looked like he was 2 generations younger than Su. Do you know why?" Mississippi Lu pursed her lips and said, "That's nothing. Taoist Kung Fu focuses on maintaining one's health. It has a certain effect of prolonging one's life and retaining one's youthfulness. That Taoist must be practicing a top-notch youth-retaining technique. I heard from my father before." As she said this, she seemed to recall something from the past. Her tone paused and her face darkened slightly. He was about the same age as Su, but he looked so young. Li had been eyeing old Taoist Yuan for a long time. His interest was immediately piqued and he hurriedly asked, "What? What did our father say?" "Mississippi." Lu came back to her senses. She glared at him and said, "Who's with our father? What you said isn't right." Li looked at her and explained, "You and Rui are sisters. Your father is Rui's father. I'm Rui's husband. Rui's father is my father. In this way your father is my father. Besides, we're a family." Mississippi Lu did not argue with him. She waved her hand and interrupted him. "My father used to say, 'Our father.'" Li corrected her again. "In the past." In the past, our father said that he had seen a Taoist priest who had cultivated the Taoist technique of retaining one's youth to the extreme. He had already lived for 60 years, but he still had the face of a young man. His appearance would not change until he died. Speaking of this, Mississippi Lou did not care at all. She changed the topic and said, however, although this kung fu can maintain one's appearance, it doesn't help martial arts much. It also needs to buy all kinds of precious medicinal materials. Not to mention the time and effort it takes. The silver alone is not something ordinary people can afford. It's just a useless kung fu. Li Yi said indifferently, we're not ordinary people. It's not a big deal to spend more money. Mississippi Lou frowned and said, the silver is not the point. The point is that it's a waste of time. It's better to use it to learn some practical kung fu. Li Yi shook his head and said, you can't say that. Rui, you're 19 years old this year. It's the most beautiful time of a woman's life. But can you guarantee that you'll still look like this in 10 or 20 years? Let's not talk about other things. In a few years, although you'll keep practicing kung fu and your figure won't change, wrinkles will appear on your face. Your skin will become loose and lose its luster. In a few years you'll be old and your pearls will turn yellow. Old and pearls turn yellow? Mississippi Lou looked at him. Li Yi could hear the cracking of his knuckles. Pretend I didn't say anything. Li Yi turned his head and walked away. As he walked he said, if you think it's useless then forget it. I'll let Rui practice. I'll let Xiao Huan practice too. By then you'll be the only one. Mississippi Lou leaped slightly and appeared in front of Li Yi. She asked calmly, what if I'm the only one? Li Yi walked around her and said softly, only you can experience the complete life of a woman. As a woman who wouldn't want to remain young and beautiful forever. However, there was a price to pay for everything. Using a large amount of time to cultivate the Taoist youthful but useless technique of retaining one's looks would affect one's martial arts path. But if she didn't learn it, her sister and Xiao Huan could keep their looks. After a few years, she would be the only one who would become old and withered. This was naturally something she couldn't tolerate. Mississippi Lou clenched her fists and looked at Li Yi, who was about to slip out of the door. She said in a low voice, come back. Mississippi Lou looked at him and asked, Taoism's kung fu has never been taught to outsiders. Not to mention this kind of top-notch art of retaining youth. That Taoist Yuan is a grandmaster and has a high position in Taoism. Are you sure you can handle him? Li Yi smiled and looked straight at her. He said, in this world there's no one I can't handle. He could even handle a monk, let alone a Taoist. Although those people had no desires and only wanted to cultivate, it didn't mean they didn't care about anything. A few Taoist canons that didn't exist in this world pointed them to a few more paths of cultivation. It was just a useless secret manual. How could Taoist Yuan be reluctant to give it to them? With one more Taoist scripture, he would be able to impart all of his years of experience in practicing this technique. With one more book, he would have a consultant who would be at his beck and call in the future. With one more book. In order to prevent Mississippi Lou from aging so early, Li Yi's hands were sore. Take it. He tossed 2 booklets to her. One of them recorded the youth retaining technique, and the other recorded the insights and experiences of old Taoist Yuan and the seniors of their sect when they cultivated this technique. It would allow people to take fewer detours when cultivating. Although Taoist Yuan wouldn't give him a fake one out of respect for the Lord of Tao and virtue, it was necessary to let Rui and second great-uncle examine it first. After watching Mississippi Lou go to Rui's room, he sat down at the stone table in the courtyard. He took out a few pieces of paper from his sleeve and opened them one by one. In the end, the Chui family couldn't sit still. This time they had to be wary of not only the Chui family but also the Chu family. Ever since Grand Tutor Chu had returned to the capital, he had spent most of his time in seclusion. But recently, he had frequently visited the famous Confucian scholars near the capital. No one knew what they had talked about, but the scholars of the capital had frequently gathered and there had been many movements. In the end, the Chu family still made a move. Even though they were already mentally prepared, they still felt a little complicated when it happened. Her Royal Highness was already very famous among the scholars in the world, but if they didn't target the princess, Grand Tutor Chu, Li crumpled all the papers into a ball and sighed softly. Mississippi Lou walked out of the room and looked at him. Oh yes, there's one more thing. I asked, but Chief Su said he didn't teach you any techniques. Ah, he didn't? Li looked surprised. After a while, he nodded and said, oh, if he didn't, then he didn't. Maybe I remembered wrongly. Chapter 887. In the pavilion in the middle of the lake, Li was cracking melon seeds. Occasionally he would throw a few melon seeds into the lake to attract a few fish. The proud Lolita, with her sharp eyes and quick hands, caught them with a small net. She then quickly ran to her private courtyard and put them in a transparent fish tank. When only the two of them were left in the pavilion, Li Mingzhu stood up from the stone bench and said slowly, "Grand Tutor Chu has been going around these days. He has gathered some influential scholars and encouraged the scholars in the capital and the vicinity of the capital to write a letter to ask Father to recall the king of Shu from Shuzhou and have him enter the Eastern Palace to preside over the court." What did His Majesty say? Li Yi had already peeled a plate of melon seeds. He picked up the plate and gestured to her. Her Royal Highness took the plate and gathered all the melon seeds that he had spent a long time peeling into her hands. Li Yi secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva and wondered if he had expressed the wrong intention just now. When he handed the plate to her, he clearly wanted her to pinch a few seeds as a gesture. The princess ate all the melon seeds in a way that made Li Yi envious. Then she said, "Father has not expressed his opinion, but this matter has greatly affected the scholars in the capital. It is not a long-term solution to leave it like this. Moreover, Grand Tutor Chu has already begun to visit some officials in the court. It should be for this matter. Many of those people were his students. After all, they have a righteous cause and Grand Tutor Chu has personally come forward, I'm afraid." The same method used by the Chui family and Grand Tutor Chu had a completely different effect. After all, the latter was simply the benchmark in the hearts of the scholars of the Jing kingdom. With a casual wave of his hand, countless people would echo him. There were peaches and plums all over the world. To be precise, the old emperor was also one of those peaches and plums. Grand Tutor Chu's influence in the Jing kingdom could no longer be described as 100 people at a single call. If it weren't for the fact that the king of Shu had made such a grave mistake, which could be described as a bastard or a rebellion, he wouldn't even need to make such a big fuss. All he had to do was stand out and make his stand clear. Naturally, countless people would follow him. But then again, Li Yi also felt that the old emperor treated the king of Shu and the Chui family differently from the other princes. It was even somewhat out of line with his usual style of doing things. They had been monarch and minister or friends for so long, and there was a tacit understanding between the Chui family and the king of Shu. "Don't worry. You know His Majesty's temperament." Li Yi smiled and said, "What he has decided is not so easy to change." The Tsundra Loli had already released the fish, washed her hands and ran over. As soon as she entered the pavilion, she asked Li Yi, "Sir, where are the melon seeds you peeled for me? I want to eat them all at once." Then she saw the empty plate on the table. "Sir." She pouted and looked at Li Yi with an aggrieved expression. Li Yi looked at Emingzu, and the proud Lolita followed his gaze to look at Emingzu. Emingzu stared blankly at Li Yi, and the proud Lolita's gaze shifted to him again. "Sir." Li Yi helplessly pinched her face and said, Okay. I'll peel more for you right away." On a grassy slope across the lake, a figure crawling there finally put down the binoculars in his hands. Something's wrong indeed." Li Xian hung the binoculars around his neck and slid down the slope. Through many long-distance observations, he could already confirm that Emingzu and Li Yi did not have the kind of relationship that he had always thought. They were using this relationship to cover up something that they did not want him to know. What was it that made Emingzu willing to put down her reputation? The fire of curiosity in his heart burned even more intensely. On the way back to the Academy of Sciences, he ordered a guard behind him. "Bring me the person from yesterday." The guard responded. Not long after, a skinny old man was brought in. After walking into the room, the old man immediately bowed respectfully. "This commoner greets Your Highness." "Dispense with the formalities." Li Xian waved his hand and looked at him. He asked suspiciously, "You said that you can guess what other people are saying by looking at their lips?" The old man immediately said, "Your Highness, this commoner has studied lip reading for decades. Although I can't say that I can guess everything correctly, I can roughly guess it." "Teach me." Li Xian looked at him and said, "Didn't you want to pass down your unique skill? I'll leave a place for you in the Academy of Sciences." The old man was stunned. He immediately knelt on the ground and said repeatedly, "Thank you, Your Highness. Thank you, Your Highness." The Chu family. The middle-aged man helped the violently coughing Grand Tutor Chu back to his room. After a moment of hesitation, he said, "Father, why don't you not go out for the next 2 days? You've just recovered from your cold. The doctor said that you should rest well at home. Since it's already begun, it can't be stopped." Grand Tutor Chu covered his mouth and coughed. How has Ping been these days? The middle-aged man sighed. He locks himself in his room every day and doesn't say a word. But this makes me even more worried. Grand Tutor Chu turned to look in a certain direction and murmured, "It's my fault. I've restrained him too much in the past. Everyone, let's not be restrained today. We won't go home until we're drunk." At the Chui family banquet, Chui Qingming faced the crowd and laughed. He then raised his cup and downed it in one gulp. "Lord Grand Tutor is willing to help us. This time we definitely won't lose. Lord Grand Tutor is still the best. We usually don't even get to see those great scholars, much less ask them to help us. This time even His Majesty will have no choice but to agree to recall the King of Shu back to the capital. The letter of the people has been presented. Now we're just waiting for an opportunity." In these 2 years the King of Shu's faction had suffered a series of blows. If they didn't do something to raise their morale, they would probably never be able to regain their confidence. And to them, what could be more important than helping the King of Shu return to the capital? "Come, Brother Chui, let me toast you." The crowd repeatedly toasted Chui Qingming. Although he was the second son of the Chui family, during this period of time the family head, Chui Qingze, had been depressed. Chui Qingming made all the decisions in the Chui family. Although he wasn't the family head, he was no different from the family head. In a corner of the banquet, Zheng Shichen turned to look at someone beside him. "Why aren't you drinking?" Qin Chong shook his head. "This wine doesn't have any taste." "I think so too." Zheng Shichen smiled and picked up a purple clay teapot. "They drink wine, we drink tea. Qin family." After dinner, Qin Yen raised his head to look at the old man and asked, "Lord Father, what Grand Tutor Chu said today?" Qin Xiang glanced at the person below who was engrossed in eating. He shook his head and said, "My Qin family will not participate in this matter." Although the brothers of the Qin family who were officials in the court still had countless doubts, since their Lord Father had already spoken, they could only nod. On the way back to the room, the large man asked the Qin family's fifth master in surprise, "Fifth master, who is that old man who came to our house today? Why does even the Prime Minister have to bow to him?" The Qin family's fifth master explained, "That is Grand Tutor Chu. When Lord Father was young he was also his disciple." The large man still wanted to ask more, but the Qin family's fifth master's footsteps paused. Then he quickened his pace and walked to the door. Seeing a figure at the door, he asked in surprise, "Lord Father, why have you come?" "I couldn't sleep so I took a walk." Qin Xiang shook his head and said, "It's getting late. You should rest early." The Qin family's fifth master nodded. Qin Xiang turned to leave but his footsteps paused again. He turned his head and asked, What do you think of the current court? Didn't Father say that the current court has rarely been so clear in decades, and that I shouldn't listen to the nonsense of outsiders?" The Qin family's fifth master paused, then said, "Moreover, I'm not in the court so I really can't see clearly." Qin Xiang raised his head to look at the dark clouds covering the night sky, where not a single star could be seen. He sighed and muttered, "The sky is about to change. I just can't see clearly." The proud Lolita who had recently come to their house to freeload frequently looked at her dazed husband and reminded him, "Sir, the meat in the pot is cooked." Li came back to his senses. Looking at the slightly curled up lamb meat in the pot, he shook his head and said, "There's no rush. Let's wait for it to float up." Chapter 888. Led by Grand Tutor Chu, several famous scholars in the capital are no longer just asking for the King of Shu to return and take charge of the Eastern Palace. In the past 2 days there have been rumors among the officials they influence that you are the sycophant who obstructed the peace talks between the Qi and Jing kingdoms, stirring up a foul atmosphere in the court. Li didn't continue her words. Instead he asked, "Tomorrow is the 13th. How are the preparations going?" Emingzu nodded and said, "Father has already personally issued the edict. It can be announced at any time. You can arrange the time yourself." Then she frowned and looked at him. "If you really had any ideas you should have told me in advance. Their target this time is you. Don't always look so indifferent." "It doesn't matter if I didn't," Li Yi said somewhat helplessly. "The Chu family has been caught red-handed, so we have no choice but to work hard. In terms of influence in the imperial court, all of us combined are no match for that Grand Tutor. If they want to talk, let them talk. We can't shut their mouths." Emingzu was startled. She asked in confusion, What blackmailed the Chu family? The Chu family. Li Yi had just opened his mouth when he suddenly looked at Li Xian, who was standing to the side. He asked, "Is there something on my face?" "No." Li Xian shook his head without hesitation. "Then why do you keep looking at me?" Li Xian shrugged. "Other than you and Emingzu, there are only the two of you here. If I don't look at you, am I supposed to look at myself?" It was one thing to look, but to look for an hour and mumble while looking was quite abnormal. He glanced at Li Xian and said to Emingzu, "Let's go over there and talk." On the bustling streets of the capital, the goddess of Luo Shui tilted her head and looked at Li Yi. She asked in confusion, "Where are we going?" Li Yi said casually, "We have nothing to do anyway. Let's just walk around." Zheng Zumo looked at him and asked, "Do you remember what day it is today?" Li Yi was puzzled. "April 13th, what's wrong?" "It's nothing." She shook her head and looked ahead. She pointed and said, "There's a new jewelry shop over there. Let's go take a look." The goddess of Luo Shui wasn't in a good mood today. Along the way she didn't buy anything. She lowered her head and was lost in her thoughts. Only when the two of them were far away from the bustling city and there were fewer and fewer people around them did she finally come back to her senses. She looked around and looked at Li Yi. She asked doubtfully, "Why did we walk here?" Li Yi raised his head and looked at the plaque above the gate, which read, "Zheng Residence." He held her hand and smiled, "Let's go in." Zheng Zumo's body almost subconsciously paused. This used to be the place she was most familiar with, but also the place she was most unfamiliar with. It had carried her sweetest and happiest memories and was also the beginning of the longest nightmare she had ever had. She held Li Yi's hand tightly and looked back at him. Their eyes met for a moment. Then she turned back and let out a long sigh. She nodded and said, "Let's go." The two of them stepped on the stone steps. Li Yi pushed the door open. The heavy wooden door made a creaking sound, revealing a dozen figures behind the door. "Uncle Ho." Zheng Zumo looked at the old man who was bowing at the front. After a moment of daze, she looked back with surprise on her face. "Uncle Chi Nanny Hua Xiaomei, you are Xiaomei. How did you, miss?" The dozen people all bowed. The old man at the front raised his head and said with a smile, "Miss, welcome home." Her mind was blank. Holding Li Yi's hand, she was led into the Zheng residence by him. Only then did she realize that this place was completely different from the last two times she had been here. More than a decade ago, when she was still in the Zheng residence, there should be a stone pavilion on the left side of the garden. Whenever it rained, she didn't want to stay in the stuffy room. She would sit in the stone pavilion, watching the mist in the sky and listening to the pitter-patter of rain. She didn't see the stone pavilion the last two times she came to the Zheng residence. It must have been torn down. This time, it miraculously appeared in front of her eyes. Whether it was in the position or the direction it was facing, it was exactly the same as she remembered. The previous two times she saw a few small houses that didn't exist for more than a decade. They must have been built in recent years. This time they disappeared as well and an empty space under the wall reappeared. A long time ago when the weather was fine she would play shuttlecock with the maids in the Zheng residence. In the entire Zheng residence she was the only one who could play shuttlecock without hitting the ground after 100 times. The decoration in the front hall was also very different from the last time. Tables, chairs, screens. These things began to overlap with the Zheng residence in her memory. This was the Zheng residence, the only Zheng residence in her heart. She looked at Li Yi and wanted to ask him something. However, Li Yi had already pulled her into his arms and whispered in her ear, "This is your birthday present. Do you like it?" Only then did she realize what he meant when he asked her, "Do you like it here?" The last time they came to the Zheng family's house he asked her, "Do you like it here?" She didn't know how he got the Zheng residence from those people. She only knew that this was his birthday present for her and that was enough. The imperial edict has arrived. A sharp and piercing voice suddenly rang out from outside. She hurriedly escaped from Li Yi's embrace and saw two fair-skinned, beardless men walking in. The eunuch glanced at them and said coldly, "His Majesty has an edict. Kneel and accept it." Whoosh. Other than Li Yi and Zheng Zumo, all the servants of the Zheng residence knelt on the ground and didn't dare to raise their heads in fear. Zheng Zumo was about to kneel as well, but Li Yi grabbed her wrist and glared at the eunuch. The eunuch shivered and immediately put on a smile that was uglier than crying. He quickly said, "Miss, you don't have to kneel. His Majesty specifically said that the court has wronged Sir Zheng. Miss, just stand and listen." He opened the edict and said in a loud voice, "The edict reads, the previous Minister of Revenue Zheng Shiji was loyal and dutiful. He worked hard and made great contributions. However, he was framed by a villain and the court misjudged him. Now that the investigation has been carried out, we should set things right. Reward the Zheng clan with 10,000 gold and 1,000 bolts of silk. The Zheng clan will be restored. Sir Zheng was wronged and will be posthumously conferred the title of Marquis of Loyalty. After reading it, he looked up anxiously and said, Miss Zheng, please accept the edict. Seeing that she was standing there in a daze, Li Yi took the edict. The two eunuchs sighed in relief and left immediately. Li Yi held the imperial edict, looked at her and said in a low voice, The imperial edict begins with the imperial edict. It is meant to announce to the world that the Zheng family was wrongly accused, and the world will return their innocence to them. She looked up with tears in her eyes. This is also your... Li Yi wiped away the tears at the corner of her eyes and said softly, This is the second gift I'm giving you. As soon as he finished speaking, his lips were kissed by her. It wasn't a light touch like before. Her tongue pried open his teeth. Although the movement was jerky, it was wild and passionate like never before. The servants of the Zheng clan had already left. When Zheng Shichen came in, he happened to see this scene. Ahem. After standing there for a long time, he finally couldn't help but cough. The goddess of Luo Shui was like a frightened rabbit. She pushed Li Yi away in a hurry and clasped her hands together. She said helplessly, Second uncle, clang. Zheng Shichen felt like he was struck by lightning. The thing in his hand fell to the ground. Chapter 889. Zheng Shichen hurriedly picked up a box from the ground and put it on the table. This is the contract of Steward Ho and the others. From now on let them stay here. The blush on Zheng Zumo's face hadn't disappeared. She lowered her head and didn't dare to look at anyone. Thank you, second uncle. Hearing this title again after so many years, Zheng Shichen couldn't hide the joy on his face. He also let out a long sigh of relief. She was willing to call him second uncle, which meant that she had let go of the knot in her heart from 13 years ago. This was also the knot in his heart that he couldn't let go of for a long time. Then, I'll leave first. Zheng Shichen looked at them, especially at Li Yi's face, for a long time. He then turned around and left, closing the door on his way out. The Luo Shui goddess still had her head down. Li Yi sat on the chair and pulled her over. He's gone, let's continue. Continue what? The Luo Shui goddess's voice was almost inaudible. Li Yi didn't answer. Instead, he used his actions to tell her what to continue. After an unknown amount of time, she lazily leaned against Li Yi's chest. Her eyes were blurred as she murmured, Do you still remember what it was like when we first met? Li Yi grabbed her hand and said, At that time I also grabbed your hand like this and you still thought I was a lecher. You are a lecher? Zheng Zumo removed her hand from his waist and said with a blush. So be it. It's good to be a lecher. Li Yi put his hand back and said shamelessly. She symbolically struggled for a while before letting him be. She murmured, I still remember that time in the Jadeite courtyard. You rushed up from below the stage and asked me if I had transmigrated from Earth. From then on I was curious. What is Earth and what is transmigration? Now that Li Yi thought about it, he found it a little funny. Not long after he came to this world, he happened to hear someone singing Immortal Magpie Bridge, which only existed in another world. Naturally he was surprised and happy, but in the end, it was just a misunderstanding. However, if not for that beautiful misunderstanding, there would be no such scene. He couldn't help hugging her tightly and said with a smile, It's a secret. She grew up here and naturally had an unforgettable feeling for this place. When the two walked out of the room, Li Yi had already discussed with her. They would go back to Willow Lane to tidy up and move here with Wan and Ruoqing in a few days. She had never dared to do something like that before. Moreover, she did it in front of these people whom she had known since she was young. Therefore, after she walked out of the room, she blushed and lowered her head. Especially when she saw Zheng Shichen standing in front of her, even her white and tender neck was covered with a layer of pink. This time, the Chui family's target is not only the king of Shu, but also you. Zheng Shichen glared at him vaguely before saying, It may not be peaceful in the near future. Be careful. Zheng Zumo looked at Li Yi worriedly and asked, Are they going to do something bad to you? Li Yi helped her tidy up her slightly messy hair and said, Don't worry. Who do you think your husband is? The Chui family is more than 1,000 years too early to make trouble for me. Now is not the time. No matter what happens, it's best to wait and see. Zheng Shichen looked at him and said, The Chu family's influence is too wide. If you can't kill them in one strike, there will be endless trouble. Now is not the time for you to act. Sing Shichen said it was not the right time. Li could naturally understand. For example, Grand Tutor Chu's precious grandson had some strange hobbies and was related to the missing girl some time ago. But because he was the grandson of the Chu family, he was secretly let go. If this matter was revealed at a normal time, it would at most affect the Chu family's reputation a little. With Grand Tutor Chu around, the Chu family could still stand tall. However, if he was the happiest person in the Chu clan and used the clan's accumulated reputation to do something, it would be like a sharp blade that could destroy the foundation of the clan. Moreover, if they didn't drag things out, who knew who else would jump out at the crucial moment in court? In a pavilion in the middle of the lake, Li Yi was teaching Yongning how to fish. She had almost completely integrated into this world. After all, she was still young and her worldview had not formed. When she grew older, she probably wouldn't have a clear impression of the other world. How can you still sit here? Li Xian walked over from behind and said with a frown, news just came from the palace. The court is almost in an uproar. Even Uncle Huang was alarmed and went straight to the Great Hall. You're actually fishing here? Then what can I do? Li glanced at him and said, fight with those old scholars? Won't they have another reason to impeach me? The matter of your impeachment has already been suppressed by Emingzu. Li Xian shook his head and said, in court, led by Grand Tutor Chu and accompanied by 4 scholars, those people are jointly asking Uncle Huang to issue an edict to transfer the king of Shu back to the capital. Li Yi held Yongning's small hand and helped her stabilize the fishing rod. He then gently pulled it up and a fat carp jumped out of the water. The little girl let go of the fishing rod and shook Li Yi's arm. She said excitedly, brother, a fish has taken the bait. Li Yi patted her head and said with a smile, this fish, I'll make fish soup for Yongning later, in the Great Hall. His Majesty had just lost his temper. The atmosphere in the Great Hall was heavy and deathly silent. Grand Tutor Chu looked up and got up from his chair. Leaning on his walking stick, he moved step by step to the center of the Great Hall. Emperor Jing narrowed his eyes slightly and said, in the end, this world should belong to those young people. Prince Ning nodded and said, Emingzu and Xian did not disappoint us. The Chui family has the ambition of wolves. Emperor Jing looked at Prince Ning again. This time, I'm afraid you will have to personally go back to Qing and Fu. Prince Ning bowed and said in a low voice, as you command. When Li Yi and Li Xian walked to the main hall, they coincidentally ran into Emingzu coming out from inside. She asked, what's the situation inside? Emingzu shook her head and said, with Grand Tutor Chu as the leader, there are more than 20 people still kneeling inside. Li Yi walked into the main hall and saw that other than the group of people kneeling on the ground, the other officials had already left. The elder at the very front was kneeling on the ground. He must be the Grand Tutor Chu that he had met twice. He walked to the front. Grand Tutor Chu heard the sound of footsteps and slowly raised his head. Li Yi hurriedly waved his hand and said, Grand Tutor, there is no need to be so courteous. Please rise, I really cannot accept such a great courtesy from you. How dare you? How dare you? Before Grand Tutor Chu could speak, a series of harsh voices came from behind him. The 4 scholars looked at him angrily. The officials of the court behind him all shrank their necks and did not say a word. Grand Tutor Chu's expression was calm as he lightly said, I kneel for the world and the ancestral system. When the emperor is ill, the Eastern Palace should be established to stabilize the court and the people. This is the rule set by the ancestors. Do you really want to be a treacherous official who disregards the ancestral system and causes trouble for the world? Such a heavy crime, this junior can't afford to bear it. Li shook his head and bent down. In a small voice he said, I am only worried that your grandson, a young man in the prime of his youth, will injure his legs if he kneels for too long. Grand Tutor, you're already so old. If something bad happens to you and you collapse, I presume that official Chui who does not wish to reveal his name will be very sad? The old man looked at him and his gaze suddenly froze. What did you say? Li looked at him and asked, forming a clique for personal gain and pressuring the emperor in the Golden Palace. Is this the righteousness that Grand Tutor, as a scholar of the Jing Kingdom? Grand Tutor Chu's gaze slightly froze. He coldly said, my righteousness is not for you to judge. Grand Tutor's reputation is illustrious. Naturally I cannot judge. Li once again lowered his voice and slowly said, I wonder if those women who have been trampled upon by your grandson, who have been seriously injured in both body and mind, can be judged. Grand Tutor Chu's expression changed. He stood up shakily with the help of his walking stick and pointed it at Fan Xian. In a trembling voice he said, You traitor, don't you dare sully the Chu family's clean name. The Chu family's clean name for 100 years is not easy to obtain. Grand Tutor, please reconsider. Don't casually use it to gamble. Li shook his head and turned to leave. The people in the hall looked at the dazed Grand Tutor Chu and looked at each other. An old man finally could not help but ask, Grand Tutor? Grand Tutor Chu waved his hand and said, Get up. We will discuss this matter at length when we return. Watching the people leave the hall from afar, Li Xian asked in confusion, What did you say to that old man? Li watched the group leave and said, I told him that the old man's body is weak and that kneeling for too long is not good for his health. That's all? What else? Li shook his head and said, This is for his own good. If he still does not listen, then he can only blame himself. Li Xian shook his head and said resolutely, Impossible. That old man is as stubborn as a rock. Let alone kneeling until his legs are broken, even if he kneels to death, he will not easily compromise. Li waved his hand and said, Fine. Actually, I told him that His Highness said that if they do not get up, they will all be beheaded and hung at the palace gates as lanterns. The Chu family will be exterminated, the men will be exiled and the women will be sold to the brothels. They will not be allowed to sleep without receiving 100 customers a day. Just ask him if he is afraid. Li Xian was stunned and murmured, Isn't this too cruel? Li patted his shoulder again and said, If you are not so cruel, they will not be afraid. Outside the palace gates, Cui Qingming slowly followed behind Grand Tutor Chu and said, Don't worry, Grand Tutor. All the evidence of that incident has already been destroyed. What he said is nothing more than slanderous slander and framing others. No matter what he does now, even if he finds those women and points them out, people will only think that he is desperate and will not be able to do anything. His eyes flickered and he said firmly, Now that the situation has been decided, as long as Grand Tutor puts in a little more effort, the great event will be possible. Chapter 891. Jingdu had always been a troublesome place, but too many things had happened in recent days. First, a fugitive killed someone on the Lantern Festival in a cruel way. Then, a woman near Jingdu disappeared inexplicably. The wanted poster of the fugitive had been posted all over Jingdu, but there was no result until now. The case of the missing woman was solved, but it was not perfect. 2 other women had not been found. Later, the envoy of the Qi Kingdom came from afar to negotiate for peace. It was publicized quite enthusiastically for 2 days, but there was no news about it after that. In the middle of April, it was said that led by the Grand Tutor and several famous scholars forced the emperor to issue an edict to summon the king of Shu, the eldest son of the emperor, back to Jingdu and live in the East Palace. Everyone knew why the king of Shu was expelled from Jingdu at that time. If he had taken another step forward, it would have been a great crime equivalent to rebellion. Merely being expelled was already a mercy beyond the law. It was said that on that day in the hall, His Majesty was so angry that his old illness relapsed. The Grand Tutor and the others knelt in the hall and refused to get up. They did not know what happened after that. In any case, the imperial edict to summon the king of Shu back had not been issued. However, it was faintly heard that the Grand Tutor Chu and those scholars were going to carry out some activities to clean up the side of the emperor, aiming at the Minister of Honor, Li Yi County Marquis Li, who was the most favored by the emperor. Everyone knew that County Marquis Li and the princess had done a lot of good things for the world and helped many people live a good life. However, this kind of thing was planned by the scholars in the upper class. They couldn't participate in it at all. Of course they wouldn't participate in it. After all, this matter was led by the Grand Tutor, who was like a saint in the hearts of the people. Even those who were very firm in heart couldn't help but be shaken when thinking of this. This was a game between the bigwigs and they could only watch from afar. What was strange was that no matter how the opponents slandered, County Marquis Li didn't do anything, which made it difficult for countless people to guess. After all, this matter didn't only involve himself. Even the officials and forces in Jingdu who had some relations with him were greatly affected because of this matter. In the government office of the capital, County Magistrate Liu was having a headache because of a street fight. Fighting was just a small matter, but when the people involved in the fight, one was a member of the Cui family, and the other was just a commoner, and the Cui family was not in the right, the matter was a little difficult to deal with. In front of the hall, an old man revealed a smile and said, "Hee, Lord Liu, how should this case be judged?" At the very least, he had hidden the fact that he wanted to make Princess Royal Empress from the old emperor. If one were to really think about it, compared to this treasonous matter, what the Chui family did was nothing. Rui wasn't surprised by his words. After some thought, she said solemnly, "If hubby is a sycophant, then I'm the wife of the sycophant. When the sycophant and his wife join forces, there's no one to be afraid of." Li grabbed her hand and said with a smile, "Don't worry. One sycophant is enough to deal with these people. The sycophant's son is crying again. It's best you coax the sycophant's wife." Rui went to coax the restless Li Duan. Mississippi Lu walked over from behind and stood in front of him. She looked down at him and asked, "How much longer are you going to wait?" Lying on the recliner to look at Mississippi Lu, he felt like he was looking up at her. Li shook his head and said, "Those are all great Confucian scholars. In terms of influence, I can't compare to them. I have an idea. Rui, why don't you visit those stubborn old fogies one by one at night? You don't have to beat them to death. All you have to do is beat them until they are paralyzed and unable to take care of themselves. That way they won't be able to run around stirring up trouble." "All right." Mississippi Lu simply agreed. The next moment she disappeared in front of Li Yi. Suddenly losing sight of Mississippi Lu, Li Yi was startled. He immediately jumped up from the rocking chair and chased after her. He shouted, "Wait a minute. Let's discuss it again. Maybe there's another way." He didn't catch up with Mississippi Lu. Instead, he saw Li Xian and the eldest princess who came together. When the three of them walked back in, someone also came out from another high door. A middle-aged man said apologetically, "Prime Minister Qin, I'm really sorry. My father hasn't been feeling well recently and is resting in bed. He won't see anyone." Prime Minister Qin looked at the two carriages parked in front of the Chu residence. He didn't say anything. He just looked at the middle-aged man and said lightly, "I have something to say. Tell the Grand Tutor that Qinwen is grateful for his teaching back then. But today he wants to destroy the pillar of the Jing kingdom. I beg to differ." Inside the hall, Li Yi had just asked Li Xian and the eldest princess to sit down. Before the tea was served, Fang walked in from outside and said, "Marty, Lord Tseng is here. Tseng Shichen should be here soon." Li Yi nodded and said, "Invite him in." Tseng Shichen was wearing casual clothes today. When he walked into the hall, he looked up and was stunned at first. Then he immediately bowed and said, "Tseng Shichen greets the princess and the crown prince." Chapter 892. As though he hadn't expected the princess and the crown prince to be present, Tseng Shichen lowered his head and drank his tea without saying a word. Li Xian glanced at him and raised his brows. "Sir, is there something you need?" Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Ignore Lord Tseng for now. Speak your mind." Li Xian looked at him before looking at Tseng Shichen. He seemed to understand something before he frowned and asked, "You actually asked me what I need? Don't you know why we're here?" Li Yi shook his head. "What? Let me make this clear. If the Academy of Sciences runs out of funds, don't look for me. Look for Emingzu to borrow it. My family has high expenses. She can't even spend her money." Purge the emperor's side. Li Xian slapped the table and said, "That old man Chu has taken the lead to purge the emperor's side on behalf of Uncle Huang. He wants to get rid of the sycophants, but you're still sitting here drinking tea?" He said angrily, "Although old man Chu is respected and the Chu family has an extraordinary influence in the world of officials, making it nearly impossible to find any flaws, you can't just sit here and wait for death. It's not like I can't find any flaws." Tseng Shichen put down his teacup, looked at Li Xian and said, "Your Highness, you may not know this, but in the case of the missing woman case that was solved a few days ago, Grand Tutor Chu's grandson was captured on the spot at the Peng residence. It was only because someone exerted some influence that the case was left unsettled." Li Yi and Emingzi didn't look surprised. Instead, it was Li Xian who was taken aback. He stood up abruptly and asked, "Something like that happened?" Tseng Shichen nodded. When he saw Li Yi and the princess's expressions, he knew that the Chui family had been too naive the previous time. Even if he didn't say anything, he wouldn't be able to hide it from them. Li Xian frowned as he paced around the hall. He muttered, "But this alone isn't enough to topple the Chu family. It won't be a good thing if we anger old man Chu. That old fellow even said something about scholarly bones. What bullsh *t scholarly bones? What if we add a murder case?" Tseng Shichen stood up and said, "Unfortunately, the murder at the Miaoying Pavilion on the night of the Lantern Festival is also related to that young Master Zhu. That murder case had caused an uproar in the capital, but it had still not been solved. Li Xian also had some impression of it. He asked, What do you mean? Didn't you say that the criminal originally wanted to harm the grandson of Grand Tutor Chu as well? You mean that the case was originally done by that person surnamed Chu? Li Xian walked up to him and asked, if that's the case, why hasn't there been any news at all? That's because the capital governor, Tsing Shichen, with the tacit approval of Grand Tutor Chu, concealed the truth of the case and framed a fugitive who was on the run. The princess and crown prince are on the same side. Tell me, how's the investigation of the case? Lu Yizhang nodded and said, the two missing women have been confirmed to have nothing to do with the Peng family. In the process of investigating the case, I unexpectedly found that the number of missing women in the capital region in the past 2 years has far exceeded the previous years. But the places where they went missing before were relatively scattered, involving more than a dozen counties. The number of missing people in each county is not large, but if you add them up, it is an extremely terrifying number. Li Yi frowned slightly. There are so many people but there's no clue at all? Lu Yizhang shook his head and said, all the clues were inexplicably cut off after extending to the capital. Until now, there has been no useful discovery, and there is no direct evidence that these are related to the Cui family. Li Xian looked at him in surprise and asked, you suspect that the Cui family is also involved in the business of abducting women and selling women? I don't know. Li Yi shook his head and said, whether or not it has anything to do with the Cui family, we should always try our best to find the two missing women. Otherwise this case will not be over. He turned his head to look at Lu Yizhang and said, you continue to follow up on this case. Then this subordinate will go back first. Lu Yizhang nodded. After a few steps, a trace of hesitation appeared on his face. He then turned his head and said, my lord, you can deal with those rotten scholars with all your strength. There is no need to pay attention to the Cui family. Li Xian looked at Lu Yizhang's back as he left, then turned his head and said, why do I feel that there is a hidden meaning in his words? Li Yi looked at him in surprise. You can hear the hidden meaning in his words? Without waiting for Li Xian to reply, Fang walked in with a surprised expression. He looked at Li Yi and said, young master, someone has come again. It is the old man called Prime Minister Qin who came last time. Li Xian and Emingzi looked at each other. The regent eldest princess was together with the country's traitor, which was rumored to be the talk of the outside world. It was not good for the prime minister to see it. Emingzi looked at him and walked behind a screen with Li Xian. The white-haired old man stepped into the hall and said, young people are indeed fearless. The outside world is like a tide of rumors, yet you are still able to sit still. Li Yi stood up and cupped his hands. Prime Minister Qin, please sit. All right, I won't be sitting. I've only come here today to bring a message to you. Prime Minister Qin stood at the door and looked at him calmly. He said, stick to what you think is right. There are still many discerning people in the court. They will not watch everything you and Her Highness have done for these countries be destroyed in the hands of those with ulterior motives. Although I am old, with my old bones I can still block them for you young people. He said one sentence and only one sentence. After that he turned around and left. It had to be said that Li Yi used to have some misunderstandings about the old man in front of him. However, some things that happened later changed his impression of Prime Minister Qin. Regardless of the Qin family, Prime Minister Qin was an old man who lived a pure life. He was an old man worthy of admiration. He watched Prime Minister Qin's figure disappear and Fang's big face appeared in front of him again. Fang's face showed an extremely puzzled expression. Young master, what festival is it today? Li looked at him and asked, who is here? Old Lu of the county government. Chapter 893. County Magistrate Lu must have had a hard time these days. He must have been under a lot of pressure from all sides. Have a seat, Lord Lu. After he walked into the hall, Li stretched out his hand and turned to Fang, go make a cup of tea for Lord Lu. County Magistrate Lu sat down uneasily. Seeing the teacups on the table, he was slightly stunned. There were some guests just now. Emingzi and Li Xian didn't come out from behind the screen, and Li didn't explain too much. He looked at County Magistrate Lu and said, Lord Lu, I've troubled you these days. Lord Li, please don't say that. County Magistrate Lu hurriedly stood up and cupped his hands, saying, without Lord Li there would be no me, Lu Dayo, today. I can still distinguish some things. Li smiled and asked, Lord Lu, did you encounter some difficulties today? Could it be that someone from above is pressuring you? County Magistrate Lu smiled carelessly and said, I'm the magistrate of the capital city, the magistrate of His Majesty and the common people. Other people and other things have nothing to do with me. He looked at Li Yi and asked, I wonder if Lord Li still remembers this lowly official's friend? Li Yi was stunned. He thought for a moment and asked, Lord Lu, are you talking about the friend of the single-eyelid parents? Lu Dayo nodded and said, yes. Obviously, old Lu hadn't completely let go of this matter. Li Yi picked up the teacup and took a sip, indicating him to continue. He looked solemn and asked, Lord Li, I'll ask you again, is it really impossible for parents with single eyelid to give birth to children with double eyelid? Li Yi shook his head and said, I know it may be hard for Lord Lu to accept this matter, but this is indeed the law of nature, which has almost never changed since ancient times. County Magistrate Lu looked at Li Yi with hesitation on his face again. Finally, he made up his mind and said, to be honest, the person I'm talking about is not my friend. He had used this trick countless times, but he never thought that the person was a friend of County Magistrate Lu. Li Yi put down the teacup, sighed and said, in fact, I have known it for a long time. This time it was County Magistrate Lu's turn to be shocked. He looked at Li Yi and asked in disbelief, Lord Li, you also know that the King of Shu is not His Majesty's biological son? He finally breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. If Lord Li had failed in the confrontation with the Chui family, his fate would not have been any better. Losing his official hat would have been a light punishment, and he might even have been killed. However, this matter was too important and his life could be in danger at every turn. If it wasn't for his trust in Lord Li, unless it was a matter of life and death, he would definitely bury this secret in his heart forever. Unexpectedly, Lord Li had already known about this matter. What did you say? Li looked at him in a daze and asked, isn't your friend with single eyelids you? County Magistrate Lu was surprised and said, how could my friend be me? You mean His Majesty? Li reached out a hand and motioned him to stop talking. He rubbed the area between his eyebrows and tried to recall something in his mind. The old emperor had single eyelids, which was right. The King of Shu had double eyelids, which he also remembered very clearly. Imperial Concubine Chui, Imperial Concubine Chui. The key was Imperial Concubine Chui. He had only met Imperial Concubine Chui a few times, and most of the time was at night, so he really couldn't remember clearly. Clang. The screen on one side of the lobby fell to the ground, making a heavy sound. Seeing the two people coming out from behind the screen, County Magistrate Lu trembled and his legs suddenly became a little weak. Your Highness? Li stood up and looked at Mingzhu, who was walking over, and asked, do you remember whether Imperial Concubine Chui has double eyelids or single eyelids? Mingzhu's expression was a little absent-minded. After a moment, her eyes focused again. She looked at him and said slowly, in the Jing Kingdom, double eyelids are considered beautiful. Imperial concubines are also required to have double eyelids. At that time, the Chui family was powerful in the imperial court. Only they could make an exception to send a woman with single eyelids into the palace and promote her to the position of imperial concubine. Li didn't quite understand those people who would cut their bodies for double eyelids. Single eyelids and double eyelids had their own beauty. He didn't expect that the imperial concubines with single eyelids would be discriminated against in the selection of imperial concubines. It really shouldn't be. However, the key point of the problem now was not the problem of discrimination at all. It was a big problem. How could it be? How could it be? Li Xian shook his head repeatedly. The imperial palace was so strict and the imperial concubine was so noble. How could she do such a thing? Moreover, neither the Chui family nor imperial concubine Chui had any reason to do so. A hint of anger appeared on Li Xian's face as he said, the Chui family has committed a heinous crime. They have committed such a heinous crime, yet they are still stirring up trouble in the imperial court. I must report this matter to Uncle Huang. No. No. Li Yi and Mingzhu spoke almost at the same time. You. Li Xian stared at them with his eyes wide open. Why? This matter was related to the reputation of the imperial family. It was a crime punishable by extermination. Once it was investigated, not only the Chui family but anyone who had anything to do with the Chui family would not be able to escape. Those people had forced the emperor to summon the king of Shu back to the capital. They had become traitors who wanted to steal the country. It was good enough that they could protect themselves. How could they still be in the mood to clean up the side of the emperor? Mingzhu didn't bother to pay attention to him. Li glanced at him and asked, what do you think His Majesty will do if he hears such news in his current condition? Li Xian heard this and immediately fell silent. There was no doubt that if Uncle Emperor knew about this, the Cui family would definitely be destroyed. A large number of people in the capital would also die. But what about Uncle Emperor himself? The imperial physician had repeatedly warned that Uncle Emperor's body could no longer be stimulated. If he knew that the Cui family and imperial concubine Cui had done such a thing, the consequences would be unimaginable. We can't let Uncle Emperor know about this. Li Xian nodded and said, "What about you? If you let the Cui family go, how will you deal with those people?" Li shook his head and said, "You don't have to worry about this matter. I have my own way." Li Xian looked at County Magistrate Lu and suddenly said, "This matter is related to the reputation of the imperial family. Even if we have to investigate it, we can't make it public. The fewer people who know about it, the better." Li sighed and also looked at County Magistrate Lu. He murmured, "Only dead people can keep secrets." County Magistrate Lu's face was pale. He wanted to stand up, but he directly collapsed on the chair. When he walked out of the gate of the Li family, he still felt a little weak in his legs. He looked at the man beside him and said, "Brother Fang, help me a little?" Fang held his arm and looked him up and down. He said with some disdain, "Old Lu, you should exercise more. Don't keep me guessing. What's your way?" In the hall, Mingzi frowned and looked at him. She said, "Chu Ping is Chu Ping and the Chu family is the Chu family. Even if we expose these two cases, we may not be able to shake the Chu family. Don't underestimate the Chu family's position in the hearts of the officials and people. Whether we can shake them or not depends on our skills." Li walked out of the door and said, "But before that, I want to see Wengu of the Jing Kingdom." You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.